When I first saw the reveal of Death Stranding at E3 2016, I knew that this game was right up my alley. I've always loved media that expands the definition of the word weird, things that deal with so many subjects that they can't be explained in just a few words. My 3-year wait was fraught with anticipation in not just an interesting and unique concept fulfilled, but another Kojima game. A game that marked the reemergence of Metal Gear's creator, a new path, a step in a new direction. While the game was great on its own, it also felt like it became a symbol, one of independence but also connection. Death Stranding presents an about-face turn in Kojima's history of game development, as its story and gameplay are unlike anything he had done before, but it also gives us a familiar feeling, one that can be felt only through the creativity of this specific developer, his choices, and the team that he chooses to work with. It's new and fresh while also feeling like home. Death Stranding tries new things on every front. The gameplay, while looking like you're just delivering packages, manages to be dynamic and interesting throughout its long runtime. A simple change in the slope of a mountain, a lack of resource, or a new enemy presence can throw your entire balance off, creating a new dynamic and fresh approach to gameplay. The story is one of the wildest things that I've seen in a AAA game and truly feels unique when compared to its counterparts. And I say all this with the caveat that this game may not be for everyone. Some will become bored and unenamored with its gameplay loop. Some won't find the joy and addiction in its features. Some will fail to engage with its story, leaving long cutscenes feeling like they're hitting you with a stick rather than pulling you closer. But for me, it's about as close as you can get to everything that I would want in a game. Sometimes it can be hard to describe my taste in media. I tend to watch, listen to, read, and play just about everything that I can, but that doesn't mean that I don't have particular things that pique my interest more than others. Every once in a while, a game will come along that just hits all the marks. Death Stranding was probably the last AAA release to check all of those boxes for me. Death Stranding is a game that's really hard to put into words and truly is one of those experiences that requires a hands-on relationship to engage with it properly. If you haven't already played it, then I would highly recommend doing so, otherwise you're robbing yourself of something special. But if you're hell-bent on watching this video without playing the game, then I sure can't stop you. This video is technically the finale to a 6-part video series that I've been doing on every single Hideo Kojima game and every single Metal Gear game. Watching those other parts is not necessary at all to watch this video, but I would recommend it to get the full experience and the full history. If you enjoy this video, then be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out in continuing to make these videos in the future. You can also support me over on Patreon, where I offer early access to my videos, updates, and extra content from time to time. It's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Death Stranding. With the release of Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, Kojima and Konami's partnership had officially come to an end. Kojima would no longer be making games for them, and they would no longer be publishing his games. Kojima was now without a job, without a goal, without a home. He noted that during this time he felt lonely in the world. At Konami, he had a team, a group of people that he worked with. Even if the rumors are to be believed that he didn't enjoy his final years at Konami, he was at least working on the projects that he wanted to. This loneliness would inform a lot of the decisions that he made on his next game, but before he could bring that project to fruition, he would need a new studio, a new group, and new people. A lot of people that he worked with at Konami would actually leave the company as well, heading over to work at Kojima's new studio, Kojima Productions. People like longtime Metal Gear series art director Yoji Shinkawa, Metal Gear concept artist and title designer Kyle Cooper, Metal Gear writer and scenario designer Shuyu Murata, Toshiki Suda, Chihoko Uchiyama, Hiroyaki Yoshike, the list goes on and on. There was a mass exodus from the company, assumingly because people favored working with Kojima rather than staying around at Konami. Kojima was building something new, some place where he would have control over the projects that he would work on and the stories that he would tell. And it wasn't long before Kojima would be revealing the next game that he would be working on. His first project at his own studio, Death Stranding, was officially revealed at E3 2016. The game was shrouded in mystery and certainly looked like a Kojima product. The trailer opened with a William Blake quote. It featured Norman Reedus finding a baby on a beach, crying and seeing floating figures in the sky. So not only was Kojima unshackled from the restraints at Konami, but he was also once again working with Norman Reedus and Guillermo del Toro, just like he was supposed to on Silent Hills. And these weren't the only people that Kojima would be working with this time around. He had assembled a cast of famous Hollywood directors to feature in his game as well. Mads Mikkelsen, Léa Seydoux, Margaret Qualley, Lindsay Wagner, and many, many more. A lot of these actors agreed to be in his project based on the words of others, recommendations of Kojima's genius. Norman Reedus only took the call because Guillermo del Toro had told him that Kojima was going to call him and to just say yes. Nicholas Winding Refn had recommended the project to Mads Mikkelsen since they had worked together early in Refn's career for his Pusher trilogy. Fantastic movies, by the way. Go watch them. A lot of these people took a leap of faith in Kojima, and once he had a crew of people to work with, not only behind the scenes but on the screen, Kojima started to have more hope. Building these connections gave him a better idea of what his future was going to look like. Kojima originally created the theme of the game, connection, and the world around Death Stranding. The characters, systems, and implementation all came after. His biggest idea was to use movement and travel as a game mechanic rather than just something to be skipped over. In Death Stranding, I want players to enjoy the journey. Death Stranding was released on November 8th, 2019 for the Sony PlayStation 4 and July 14th, 2020 for Windows. There was another version of Death Stranding that was released in 2021, first for the PlayStation 5, called Death Stranding Director's Cut. This version of the game added a few story missions, tons of new structures to be built, new items, a racetrack, a firing range, new customization options, DualSense controller compatibility on PC, replayable boss battles, automatic delivery bots, and expanded roads. It honestly improves the game in a ton of ways. Most of these structures, roads, and items allow for a lot more quality of life. There's a ton of little changes too that drastically upgrade the experience, like allowing you to bring along carriers on your zipline rides. I did have a few issues with the PC version of the game dropping frames in certain areas though, which was kind of disappointing to see, especially after the game had been out for 3 years. Death Stranding begins with a quote from Kobo Abe's short story, Nawa. The rope, along with the stick, are two of mankind's oldest tools. The stick to keep the bad away, the rope used to bring the good toward us. They were our first friends, of our own invention. Wherever there were people, there were the rope and the stick. This is a story written by Kobo Abe, the same author that wrote The Boxman, which Kojima credits as an inspiration for the Metal Gear series. Nawa is a story about an old man who watches children through a hole in his wall. These children defile a scrapyard regularly, and he manages to catch them one day. But before he steps in, they do some unspeakable things in this scrapyard. The story illustrates the difference between the stick and the rope, how a tool can be used for good and for bad. Death Stranding will utilize this theme and its methods of delivering alternative perspectives of its world. I should also note that one of the only English translations of this story that I could find was done by Tim Rogers of Action Button Reviews in 2019. We hear a short narration about the beginning of the universe as we see different landscapes from Death Stranding's world. We see a man on a bike, our main character named Sam Bridges. He's a delivery man or a porter in this world. As he's making this most recent delivery, he swerves to avoid a woman with an umbrella and wrecks his trike. We must recover the packages that fell from his back and make our way into a nearby cave. Sam waits out the rain with the cover of the hovel over his head. The woman quickly joins him, but the two have to avoid some presence that's encroaching on their space. This monster seems to be invisible, only making handprints in the sand as it stalks them. Luckily, it seems to head out of the cave and ignore our characters. This woman's name is Fragile, and she's the head of a local delivery company called Fragile Express. We're passingly introduced to a few concepts here, namely BTs, dooms, chiral allergies, timefall, and cryptobiotes. We'll go over all of these things in due time, but for now, we just know that this woman tells Sam to watch himself.
The timefall fast forwards whatever it touches, but it can't wash everything away. The past just won't let go. I'll see you around.
Sam is a little reserved and doesn't tell Fragile too much before heading back to his destination, Central Knot City. When we get back to the city, Sam is commended on the quality of the goods that he delivered, and he's told there's a special request for him from HQ. Two men in a truck quickly pull up to our location, and one of them introduces himself as Igor from Corpse Disposal. Sam doesn't shake his hand as he has a phobia of touching people, aphanphosmphobia. Someone in the city died around 40 hours ago of an apparent suicide. In this world, bodies can't go long without being incinerated, or something called a void out happens. It's imperative that the bodies of the dead are dealt with quickly. They would normally take a longer route to the incinerator, one that isn't as populated by BTs, the same type of being that Sam and Fragile encountered back in the cave. But since time is of the essence, they need to take a shorter, more dangerous route. This is where Sam comes in. He has something called dooms, which lets him sense these beings, but not entirely see them. This mission quickly goes wrong when the group encounters BTs and their truck stops in the middle of a storm. The driver is crushed by the truck, Igor loses himself to the BTs and takes his own life, and Sam is claimed by the beings as well. While this is happening, a man in a gold mask is perched on top of the overturned truck, watching this all happen. The deaths and BTs cause a massive void out in the area, which destroys Central Knot, leaving a huge crater in its place. Sam, luckily, is a repatriate, which means that he can come back after death. He wakes up on the beach, seeing 5 large figures in the distance, the same scene from the E3 reveal. This is the intro to Death Stranding and our introduction to the world of the game. It isn't quite the setup for the story that the game will be telling, but it flirts with some of the ideas involved in the world building, and it's a good point for us to talk about those ideas. Death Stranding can be kind of complicated and confusing. It expects you to be willing to go along for its ride, whether you're lost or whether you've already located the path forward. You're being dragged along anyways, and some of your questions will have answers, others will be left as mysteries. But some of the fun is figuring out the story along the way. This complexity of the world is furthered by the fact that a lot of our assumptions about reality will be shifted as the story moves along. We will also deal with unreliable narrators that give us false information. It can be kind of confusing to keep track of, but I'd like to start this story off with some base facts about the world so that you'll understand what I'm talking about as we move along, and I can analyze the story without stopping every time to explain something. As we can clearly tell, this world is very different from the one that we currently inhabit, but it was like our world at some point in the past. There was an event called the Death Stranding. This event allowed our world and the world of the dead to overlap. In the world of Death Stranding, the afterlife is a place called the Beach. This beach is a sort of middle ground where dead souls go after their body has passed away. They use this beach as an intermediary area to travel on to the afterlife and separate themselves from this world. With the Death Stranding, though, these souls are stranded on this beach. Upon death, they spend their time searching the world of the living for something. These are BTs, or beached things. They wander this world and search for other people. If a human comes into contact with a larger BT, then a void out occurs. This causes a massive energy expulsion and leaves a huge crater in the area, destroying anything there in the process. But some people in this world are gifted. Certain special individuals have something called dooms, which isn't completely understood, but dooms gives these people the ability to sense BTs. At certain levels of dooms, people can actually see BTs entirely, but this is rare. The only other way for people to see BTs is to use something called a bridge baby. Bridge babies are an even more complicated subject, but for now, let's just say they are babies in pods whose mothers were brain dead when giving birth to them. They are neither living nor dead. They exist somewhere in between the world of the living and the dead and can therefore see the beached things. Connecting them to a suit will allow the wearer to track these BTs through some type of echolocation. BTs are usually accompanied by timefall, which is a new phenomenon. Timefall is rain that accelerates the degradation of an item or person that it comes into contact with. It can advance the age of a person or the growth of a plant. We'll even encounter characters later in the game that use timefall to progress farming. A lot of these concepts aren't quite yet understood, and since the Death Stranding came to this world, it is no longer recognizable. People now live underground in shelters and rarely come outside. The only people that really venture out of their hovels are porters, the ones that make deliveries to and from locations. These are sort of the basics of Death Stranding. There's a lot more that we'll get into in due time, but for now, this covers the gist of it. When Sam is on the beach, he sees a woman in red singing a nursery rhyme before he wanders into the water. When we die in Death Stranding, Sam will repatriate, causing us to control his soul as it finds its way back to his body. With this, we begin the first episode of the game, titled Bridget. Sam wakes up inside of a private room in Capital Knot City. A man named Deadman comes in and welcomes Sam back to the world of the living. Deadman used to be a coroner, but now does research into bridge babies. Deadman also happens to know a bit about the cuffs that are on us. They apparently keep the crew at bridges connected, giving them access to various data and information. We are then told that Central Knot City was completely destroyed in the void out that happened during the intro scene. Sam was out for 2 days, and his BB suffered damage during the event as well. It will have to be disposed of because it's malfunctioning. We're in Capital Knot City now, which is the new headquarters for Bridges HQ. Bridges is a delivery organization, one of a few that exist in this world. They employ porters and send them off to deliver and recover packages. Deadman happens to have a job for Sam. He wants him to deliver some morphine to the president, Bridget Strand. Sam wasn't aware that the president was still alive. She had cancer for a long time and apparently is on her last legs. This delivery is really a farce because the president just wants to see Sam, so we head off to the isolation ward. The situation at the ward is a bit intense. Sam actually used to be a pretty big part of Bridges. He was the adopted son of the president. He left around 10 years ago and hasn't contacted anyone since, for some reason that we aren't yet aware of. Bridget also had a daughter named Amelie who went west to try and connect the world into one large network. Die Hardman is the director of Bridges, the right-hand man of Bridget Strand. He wears a silver mask and no one has ever seen his face. He's here as well, overlooking the president during her last moments. Bridget asks Sam for one last thing, to help out Amelie and to reconnect the country.
You can make America whole. Sam, if we don't all come together again, humanity will not survive.
We don't need a country. Not anymore.
We do. Alone, we have no future.
No, America's finished. Bridget, you're the president of jack shit.
Clearly, Sam doesn't believe in any of this, reconstructing the country or connecting people. He's been out on his own for so long and has figured out how to navigate the world post-stranding. He doesn't need people to be brought back together when he sees the world through the lens of survival. She begs Sam to find Amelie with her last breath, saying that she'll wait for him on the beach. Shortly after, we see a meeting of the Bridges crew. The president is dead, but no one can know because the dream of Reconstructionism would fall apart without her championing the cause. So Sam needs to take her to the incinerator. He needs to secretly take her body up the mountain and burn it. Bridget created Bridges to work to bring the nation together.
She may be lost to us, but we still have an America worthy of the presidency.
If Bridget's body is left to rot, then it will go into necrosis in 48 hours and will become a BT. This is another large reason that bodies have to be burned after death. When Sam gets to the incinerator, Deadman reveals that he included the bridge baby in the cargo. It needs to be disposed of as well. It didn't fulfill its role when Sam needed it in Central Knot, so now it has to go. Sam is quickly set upon by BTs though, and this no longer becomes an option. He needs to use the baby because he won't be able to escape otherwise. We have to find a way out of the incinerator and head back to the city. When we get back to the private room, Deadman chastises Sam for using a BB because dooms and BBs don't mesh well together. He decides to take the baby and look after it, to do some tests and see if it's actually working after all. We then see some memories of Sam as a child on the beach with Amelie, his adopted sister. She gives him a dream catcher to wear when he sleeps. When Sam wakes up, Die Hard Man wants us to visit the president's office. This is only in the service of trying to once again convince Sam to continue on Bridget's dream. Die Hard Man then shows Sam that Amelie is here. Well, not really, she's just a hologram, or technically a chiralgram. We'll get there in a bit. Amelie hasn't seen Sam in 10 years, but she never gets older because her body is on the beach. Amelie will be the new president of the country. She will succeed her mother as Samantha America Strand. They'll rebuild the country under the new title of the UCA, the United Cities of America. Sam, of course, doesn't want anything to do with this. He already cut all of them off, and he intends to keep it that way. Amelie then appeals to Sam's emotions towards her. She tells him that she headed west with an expedition to reach Edge Knot City, all the way on the west coast. Her team was killed and she was captured by a separatist group. They want Edge Knot City to be kept independent and left alone. They engineer voidouts on purpose by killing people and giving their bodies to BTs. It's even possible that the man who took his own life in Central Knot was one of theirs. Die Hard Man tells Sam that he wants him to head west and bring Amelie home. She will then take over the presidency and fill Bridget's shoes now that she's gone. He will need a device called a Cupid, which will connect various terminals into the network along the way.
I'm Sam Porter Bridges now. I'm not a Strand. Hell, I'm not even part of this outfit. You all saw to that. I'm not getting involved with you or anyone else ever again.
Sam, of course, wants no part of this still. None of this has seemed to convince him. He doesn't think their plan is a solution to the problems that plague the world, and in the end, it might even make things worse.
Listen to me. America needs you. Both of you.
Yeah, covering the world in cable didn't bring an end to war and suffering. Don't act surprised when it all comes apart if you try to do it again. Round and round it goes. Connect, reconnect, it's not that simple.
Die Hard Man eventually tells Sam to just get some rest and to not make a decision yet. Deadman then returns the BB, thinking that he and Sam might have an affinity for each other. Sam is then talking to Amelie. She tells him that he is Sam Strand, not Sam Porter Bridges. She even notes the different meanings and applications of the word strand.
A strand is part of a rope or bond, while stranding means being washed up on the shore. And being stranded is when you can't go home. I'm stranded now, Sam. Here on the shore of the Pacific.
The two are still connected, and Sam wakes up in his room once again. Finally, after speaking to Amelie, something has awakened in Sam. He hasn't had a complete change of heart, but he decides that he's going to go west. He's only doing this for Amelie, though, not for anyone else, and surely not for the purpose of reconnecting the world. So this is where the game actually begins to open up, where we start to interact with the gameplay loop and its systems. I'll go over all of the intricacies of gameplay in a second, but I first think it's important to analyze and talk about what has happened in the first and second chapter of the game. Let's leave the world as a whole alone for a little bit, because this is kind of what you have to do with Death Stranding. If you really try to get a full understanding of it before the end of the game, you'll lose yourself in the details. You'll miss what's really going on with the characters, with the people that are engaging with each other. And this isn't to say that the world is less important than the story, but it lifts the story up. It's a stage so that our major players can act out on it, and staring at the floor for too long trying to discern the type of wood that was used to make it can leave you missing important lines and scenes from the play. So let's focus on the characters for now. Sam himself is a porter, a freelance porter, no longer an official part of Bridges. We know that he left Bridges 10 years ago in the wake of some unknown event, a falling out. In those 10 years, Sam has been making deliveries and surviving out in the harsh world of America. He's been braving the time fall, he's been avoiding BTs, he's been delivering packages and trying to stay whole. This is a very disconnected life. He's disconnected from the people he once knew, he's disconnected from the world at large, and he's probably even disconnected from himself. This time and whatever mystery event that took place have left Sam distanced from Bridges. He's jaded, he's alone, and he likes it that way. He wants absolutely no part of whatever Bridges has planned. What exactly does Bridges have planned, though? Without getting into the nitty-gritty of the tech parts of the world just yet, Bridges wants to connect America back together again. Since the Death Stranding, most people are incredibly disconnected. There's no internet anymore, no flight. There are cities like that of Capital Knot or what was Central Knot City, but people aren't exactly living the best lives there. We don't ever see the inside of these cities, but from what we hear, the people of this world are depressed. The phobia that Sam has, a phobia of touch, has become common. Connection with others is generally avoided because people are too afraid of what could become of them. When the scariest thing you can think of is touching a BT, causing a void out, and the destruction of your city, maybe connection becomes a thing of the past. Because people don't have these connections anymore, they rely on synthetic oxytocin to regulate their hormone levels. Birth rates are down as a direct cause of this lack of connection. Asexuality is up. The world is a pretty bleak place. And outside of the cities, preppers or researchers have their own little terminals and way stations where they either exist with maybe one other person or completely alone. The idea of going outside and braving the wastes that exist between these way stations is just pure insanity. The only people that do this are porters. They're the only ones that have the equipment and know how to manage surviving a group of BTs, or that can shelter themselves from the timefall. If your average person gets caught up in a group of BTs, they run the risk of causing a void out. If they get caught in a timefall storm, they run the risk of fast-forwarding themselves into the future as an old man or woman. And all of this isn't to mention the terrorists that are attacking cities or the mules that roam the wastes in search of cargo. Bridget Strand had a plan to change all of this. She wanted to reconnect the country through a chiral network. This network would allow people to communicate from their little underground homes. It would allow them to transfer data at lightning speeds. And for the more science-inclined, they could share their research with others. Printing new equipment, developing new materials, even researching past data on the network so that someone might be able to find the cause of this whole mess. And it's quite obvious that this is the way forward, that connecting people might be the only way of finding a solution to the Death Stranding, or at the very least, finding out why it happened and learning more about how to deal with this world moving forward. So why is Sam so resistant to this idea? Well, when I first played the game, I didn't really understand this either. I mostly thought it was just a classic trope that was brought in because it was familiar. The reluctant hero, after all, wasn't something that Kojima was above using in the past. More will be revealed about Sam's past as the story unfolds, and this will explain some of the reason that he's so hesitant to connect the world. But if you think about the world and the state of it, it makes a little more sense. Certain notes or interviews in the game will make a point to note what America was like before. Some people have fond memories of the old world. Others remember it as a terrible place, and even more of those people weren't there to see it at all. Sam is one of those people that was born after the Stranding. He has no memories of the old world. This is the only place that he knows. A place where death means that you are doomed to wander this world forever. Unless your body happens to be incinerated, of course. But still, the idea that death has been changed, that it's been warped and twisted into something beyond human interpretation. There is no room for the imagination in death anymore. For the most part, this society knows what happens after you die. There are rules, there are standards. There's something of a comfort in that for some, but for others, it's an even worse fate than what they could have predicted. And the world of the living is no treat either. You're either met with the dangers of the wastes, or you're doomed to stay in a small building with no one to speak to, no one to make a connection with, no one to love. Maybe you're stranded with no access to a porter and you're short on food. Maybe you're one of the unlucky ones that gets caught in a void out. Maybe you just get tired of all the isolation and the recesses of your mind take hold of you. Either way, your end will rarely be a quiet and peaceful one. Even the president of the country went out in a brutal and elongated way. And this idea of connection ties back into the game's beginning, the quote from Kobo Abe about the stick or the rope. This is the central idea of Death Stranding. You can either choose the stick as your tool, the weapon to keep people at a distance, or you can choose the rope. And somehow Sam has found himself caught between both when we meet him. He has decided to keep people at a distance, but he still connects them by making deliveries. And as for why Sam doesn't want to be a part of this initiative to see the world connected once again, largely probably has to do with his own experiences of this world. Even more recently, he probably shares some of the guilt in what happened to Central Knot City. Survivor's guilt must come with every single void out that he's a part of. Everyone in Central Knot was wiped off the map. Igor and the driver in their caravan died, and Sam was the only survivor. Being a repatriate in this world is even worse than all of the things I just listed. Sure, you can't die, but you also can't move on. It's the classic curse of immortality. He isn't technically immortal, but it's pretty damn difficult for him to die. And being trapped in a world that isn't particularly a nice place to be in, and even if you could die, having to suffer what is probably a worse hell afterward, doesn't exactly bode well for your outlook. So it makes sense that Sam would have a burn it all down mentality in the beginning, let it all rot away. And the other side of this ideology is Bridges. The current organization is made up of Die Hard Man and Dead Man, at least from what we've seen so far. A few other integral members will be introduced as the story goes on, but for now, these are the upper ones that we've seen. Bridget Strand has now passed away, and with Sam's mother gone, the only one that he has left is Amelie. But even she is being held captive in Edge Knot City. So there's two goals here: to connect the country to the chiral network, and once we reach the other side, to rescue Amelie and bring her back east. Obviously, Sam has eventually joined the organization, but only because his last connection in this world is to Amelie. If she's gone, if that connection is severed, then he'll truly have no one. We don't know much about the other characters just yet, so it's time to actually start heading out into the world, making deliveries and connecting the country. But how exactly do we do that? Well, I'm not even truly sure what genre name to give Death Stranding. I could just call it an action-adventure game, but because that name is so broad, it doesn't exactly fit. Death Stranding has elements of stealth, combat, building, walking, traversal. There's a lot of moving parts in general. This is probably why Kojima hesitated to say what genre the game was when giving interviews. At one point, he referred to the game as a Strand-type game, which most people have still yet to decipher. Kojima does say at different points that he thinks Death Stranding is doing something new and that it was a genre unlike any other. Therefore, he was waiting for other people to name this genre, in the same way that we now refer to Metal Gear as a stealth game. As with the stealth games I created, Metal Gear Solid, I always wanted to create something new. I believe that this is my destiny. If I had to create something that already exists, I think that it should not come from me. I'm not saying no to the other games out there, but when it comes to me, I want to create something new. That's why I wanted to create this genre. In Death Stranding, our main goal is to deliver packages. We do this either by taking deliveries from terminals or by picking up lost packages that we find. Delivering a certain amount of packages to a terminal, which is different for every station depending on how willing to be connected they are, will connect them to the chiral network. The chiral network is kind of difficult to explain. We first need to talk about chirality and chiralium. Chiralium is a material that's found in the world of Death Stranding. We can even pick it up and use it to craft new structures or items. Chiralium is usually found near places where BTs prowl, where timefall is, and just generally places where the beach has crossed over into this world. The chiral network is a network that uses the beach to transmit data. When a facility is hooked up to the chiral network, they can transmit research, data, any number of things to other facilities that are also on the network. This is generally also how chiralgrams are used. Because this network uses the beach to transmit data, the transfer happens a lot faster than it would normally. It's almost instantaneous because the beach does not experience the passage of time. This is why Amelie doesn't age. This is why chiralium itself doesn't age or degrade, because it comes from the beach. Since the data is being sent there and no time is passing, it just hops to the other side. But when we bring a facility online, that also means that we can use its features as well. We can fabricate materials there, we can take new orders there, and use new structures in the surrounding areas. There's a lot of moving parts to the gameplay of Death Stranding, and I think it makes sense to break them down one by one. The first of these is walking. When a child is born, one of the first things that it learns to do on its own is walk. And in much the same way, Death Stranding makes us feel like a child by imposing restrictions and external forces on what should be a simple act. Most games do not give this act a second thought. Maybe you'll have a few seconds at the beginning of a tutorial section where a message pops up informing you on how to move, but that's the end of it. In Super Mario Bros., you press forward and Mario walks in that direction. In Persona 3, you press forward and the main character walks in that direction. Even in Metal Gear Solid, you press forward and Snake moves. Death Stranding shares this similarity with those titles in that if we press forward, he does in fact move forward. But outside influence makes this moving forward more difficult than it looks. When pressing the R1 button, the Odra deck attached to our shoulder will allow us to scan the terrain in front of us. This terrain will then be color-coded in our vision based on how treacherous it is. Blue terrain is simple to walk on, yellow terrain is slightly uneven, and red terrain has a high chance of causing us to trip or fall. The same goes for water. If the water is color-coded blue, we can walk through it easily. But if the water has a red marker, it's either flowing far too fast for us to walk in, or we won't be able to touch the ground, causing us to be swept downstream. Terrain can get a bit more complex as well, with snow being introduced in the later parts of the story, sliding around on mud, falling from high places, etc. All of these things make walking more of a task than just pressing forward. But what are the consequences of falling down? Cargo is the most precious resource in Death Stranding. You might think it's resources, but it isn't. When delivering cargo, we can damage it by dropping it, letting it stay too long in time fall, getting shot, etc. Delivering your cargo in one piece is paramount to getting a better rating by the time you get to your destination, and even more than that, just being a good porter. If we fall, then our cargo can take damage from the shock. It can fall off our back, rolling down a hill and taking damage from that, or even be entirely lost to us. There are ways to repair cargo once it's been damaged, but we'll get to that later. So what weapons do we have in the fight against falling down? Steadying yourself is the first thing that you can do. By pressing the R2 and L2 buttons on the controller, we can have Sam steady himself. This gives him a more stable ground and will oftentimes allow him to traverse most of the red-marked treacherous terrain without tripping. Steadying can also be used to prevent Sam from being swept downstream and crossing over a river. Sam can even climb incredibly steep slopes just by steadying himself. Managing your weight as well will make traveling a lot easier. If you have cargo that's stacked incredibly high or just far too heavy, then Sam will walk slower. He'll use more stamina, and he'll be more prone to shifting to the side when turning. Again, we can get items later that can augment how much we can carry, that can offload our cargo onto another structure, but in the beginning of the game, not taking too much cargo is your best bet at preventing big accidents that send your cargo flying all over a mountain. This is sort of what makes up the base mechanics of Death Stranding. Everything else just works to build on top of that. They're all just additions. Death Stranding has been referred to as a walking simulator quite often. You'll see this term thrown around on social media, in discussions about the game, and even in user reviews. This term has been used for quite a while, mostly in a derogatory way to note that a game is boring, that it doesn't feature much gameplay, and only contains walking forward as its main mechanic. Some online will note the first walking simulator as The Forest, a game from 1983 developed by Graham Relf, and intended as a simulation on keeping orientation when in the woods. Walking simulators came into the public eye probably most notably, though, in 2012 with the Chinese Room's Dear Esther, and rose to prominence from there. Other notable entries are games like Gone Home, Firewatch, and more recent titles in the liminal genre like Pools. These games are usually more focused on story, the experience of the game and environment, rather than interacting with the game world. Now, Death Stranding is literally a walking simulator in that it simulates walking more than the average game does. But the similarities that it shares with a game like Gone Home begin and end with the fact that you might push forward on your controller to make the character move ahead. In this way, Death Stranding is more like Super Mario Bros. Than it is the Stanley Parable. Death Stranding is a walking simulator in the same way that QWOP is a walking simulator, and that it places focus on walking as a mechanic. People that call Death Stranding a walking simulator do not understand the genre in the first place, and have probably failed to play Death Stranding in its entirety. Death Stranding may simulate walking, but it is not a walking simulator. But this doesn't mean that the walking is insignificant, or that it doesn't have an effect on the player. Some of the best moments in the game are ones that the game crafts through its use of landscape and music. When we're at the end of a long journey and our destination crests into our view over the mountainside, a song begins playing and it almost feels like it's all over. The struggle that it was to get here, the trials that we faced along the way, the joy of ending, but also the melancholy feeling on the horizon because you know it's almost done. Weight is the next factor that ties into how we play the game. Cargo and items are things that we have to carry around on deliveries. The weight of this cargo and where it is placed on our body or off our body determines how easy or difficult it is to walk around. We can stack cargo straight on our back so that it towers over us like a stack of pizzas, something else we will also be delivering in the game, or we can scatter it around our body, placing pieces on our suit, on floating carriers and vehicles that we bring along with us. Obviously, if we're driving a car, then we don't have to worry too much about weight. But if we don't have access to things like that yet, then weight can slow us down. It can take up space. It can lean us too far to one side or the other. Weight also factors in for equipment, not just cargo. We can take different pieces of equipment, like weapons to defend ourselves or ladders to reach high places. But the more equipment we take, the more weight we are carrying. The better prepared we are, the more we have to deal with along the way. Because of this, Death Stranding starts to conform to your playstyle. Like a hand in water, it simply fits around the space that you occupy without effort, without thinking, without intention. It just does. Speaking of items, there are plenty of things that we will need on our journey. Different things that we can fabricate or pick up to make our travels easier. Ladders will allow us to climb sheer surfaces. Climbing anchors will allow us to rappel up or down cliffs. Weapons will allow us to take on enemies. Floating carriers will allow us to carry more cargo. Different mechanical legs will allow us to either run faster, walk through treacherous terrain, or load more deliveries onto our backs. There is a vast array of different things that we can take with us, and which items you choose to use will certainly fall back into how you approach the game. If you like to raid mule camps, then you'll probably be decked out with weapons and ammo. If you like to stealth through areas, maybe you'll take some extra decoys. And almost everyone will have a ladder or two on them at all times. PCCs are probably the most important item that we can fabricate, though. These allow us to build large structures, things that can't be carried on us. We can build post boxes to drop off cargo if we can't carry it the rest of the way. We can build bridges that make traveling over water or gaps easier. We can build generators that charge vehicles or equipment. We can build zip lines that allow Sam to travel from place to place much quicker, avoiding the hassle of walking. We can even build timefall shelters that allow you to stay out of the rain and that spray an aerosol that repairs your cargo for you. These structures are incredibly important because they change the landscape of the world and how we plan out routes. But they aren't just important to us in our game, they're important to everyone that plays this game. I said before that the core mechanic of Death Stranding was walking. And while this is true, I would say that Death Stranding contains two cores, walking and connection. Death Stranding is mostly played as an online game. That doesn't mean that you'll be fighting off against other player characters or that you'll even see them in the world. This isn't possible, but you will see the remnants of them. You will see their shadow. You will see the trail that follows swiftly behind them. Created structures will be able to show up in other people's worlds. This means that when you bring a facility into the chiral network, structures that other players have created will begin to show up in your world around the area of that facility. Now, of course, not every player structure ever created will show up in your world, just a handful. You can also come into contact with cargo that players might have dropped, picking it up for them and delivering it to its final place, finishing what they couldn't do. You can find trails on the ground, footpaths that have been carved out by players walking repeatedly over the same area. You can find footsteps in the sand from players taking a particular path. Even in boss battles, players will show up to throw you items that you might need. All of this furthers the theme that Death Stranding is trying to get across: connection. The world of Death Stranding is bleak. We've already established that, and this is further realized by the player once you begin making a slew of deliveries across its mountains and rivers. But that bleakness is offset by the gameplay and its ability to connect us with others without actually seeing them or speaking to them. In a way, the players are just like the people on the chiral network. We are living what is ultimately a lonely experience, but we are connected to something larger and emboldened by those very connections. Walking across a lot of land, spending time carving through its mountains and valleys, running out of stamina, running our boots ragged, using all of our equipment only to come across a bridge that someone else placed, is a wonderful feeling. Suddenly we feel less alone in this world because we don't remember placing this bridge. It's just there. Someone helped us without knowing that they were helping us specifically. They just did it because they could. And this feeling goes both ways. The game naturally incentivizes you toward this path of selflessness. Once you experience how nice it is to have a handy or helpful structure, you start to place them yourselves, because you know someone might get some use out of them. You know that you'll never see the effects of placing this structure. You'll never hear specifically from this person, but you want to help nonetheless. And it's not total selflessness, because we do get something in return. In Death Stranding, instead of gaining experience for completing tasks, we gain likes. We receive likes from NPCs when we deliver them a package. This contributes towards their connection level. We receive likes from players when they use our structures or when they decide to manually like one of the things that we've done. We can give out likes as well. If we use a structure and find it particularly useful, we can like these structures. In some ways, the chiral network in the game itself is like a social network implemented into a video game. But this social network has a lot less direct interaction. Rather than speaking directly to someone, we influence them from afar in a positive way. Kojima originally wanted to include some other ways for users to interact. Players who caused a void out by dying to BTs would create a crater that would be left for other players to see. But Kojima quickly realized that this was too negative. He wanted the interaction between players to only be positive influenced. And all of this feeds back into the point of Death Stranding's gameplay systems. It isn't about the destination, but more about the journey. The journey and the experience of the game is more important than actually delivering cargo. Getting to the place in a perfect way, preventing cargo from being damaged, and getting out unscathed is far less important than the journey to the place. Death Stranding might be difficult for a lot of people to enjoy, mostly because it requires a lot from the player. Not only does it challenge a lot of conventions about video games, but it also asks the player to sit and sort of enjoy the silence for a bit. Certain deliveries may be tense, they might require a lot of travel, we might encounter a ton of BTs, but this isn't always the case. Sometimes deliveries are quiet, sometimes there aren't a lot of obstacles to overcome, sometimes we're just taking a path we know and heading to a destination that we've been to before. But both of these journeys are equal. You have to take the good with the bad and just learn to enjoy it. There's a lot to enjoy with Death Stranding as well. The world is gorgeous, and while it is distinctly repulsive and bleak, it's strangely a place that feels nice to be in when we aren't getting hit with timefall. There are moments in Death Stranding that are high intensity though. The two things we'll have to contend with physically are BTs and mules. BTs will usually be in specific places, generally where timefall is located, and where the chiralium density is high. In these areas, our Odra deck will activate and will start to detect BTs in the nearby area, flashing faster if we're closer to them, and flashing slower if we're further from them. If we happen to get too close to the BTs, they'll start to track us by making handprints in the world. We can hold our breath to get by the creatures when we are closer to them. We can actively attack BTs if we like, but it can make things a bit more difficult. We can only hurt them by using weapons that have Sam's blood in them. These could be grenades made from his blood or bullets made from his blood, but either way, Sam's blood, since he has dooms, repels the BTs. This will also work for Sam's shower water and his piss and shit. If we happen to get caught by the BTs, they'll drag us to another larger BT that will try to consume Sam and cause a void out. Encountering BTs in the world can be pretty intense and honestly feels like a completely different game. The design of the BTs, the atmosphere of this environment, the constant rain all make these sections feel distinctly horror. It feels like a small slice of what Kojima wanted to do with Silent Hills. Of course, there's no proof for this at all, but it's quite interesting to think about the fact that Death Stranding has some horror elements integrated into it. And it's always an intense moment when the Odra deck starts to spin quickly and turns to an orange color. It certainly feels like the radio from Silent Hill. It's that distinct and that hair-raising. The loneliness of the game only factors in further here. Being out in this world all by ourselves, being forced to face these creatures without any support, and that's sort of where BB comes in. This is where our connection with him develops. It's in these dark places, because when we really think we're alone, we have a strange device on our shoulder giving us the only information that we need, what we need to avoid and where it is right now. But we don't only go up against dead beings from another plane, we also have to go up against other humans. There's something in the Death Stranding world called mules. Mules are people who were previously porters, couriers that would deliver packages for those in need. But for one reason or another, they've become addicted to the cargo, and they've gone rogue. Now they trowel the footpaths of America, searching for people who they can steal cargo from. This is actually because people in this world have a natural lack of oxytocin. We talked about this before when it related to the isolation of the people in Death Stranding cities. Because people have a lack of natural emotional connection, they need synthetic oxytocin. The porters of the world have started to gain a relationship with delivering cargo. Because they get a slight high from the recognition that they receive from delivering packages, they can become addicted to it. This results in mules, and they eventually join together in groups to steal cargo from others. They will stay in camps where they keep their cargo and weapons. These camps are just as dangerous as an area with BTs, except that we can openly fight mules much more easily than BTs. We can use non-lethal weapons to do this, like ones loaded with rubber bullets or guns that will tie up mules, allowing us to incapacitate them. We can also use violent methods to straight up kill mules, but this is not recommended. This is because we will then have a corpse on our hands, one that we will have to deal with. We can either take the corpses to the incinerator, leave them outside of a city to be dealt with by corpse disposal, or we can just let the bodies lie. The third option is easily the worst, because we will either have to deal with BTs in this area later, or if the bodies are located in an area that a lot of people travel through, this will cause a void out and will actually just randomly get a game over at some later point in the game. Now, listen, I'm usually in favor of things like this. And I love when Kojima does weird shit that you never really expect, because especially in this case, when the game tells you this might cause a void out, you think, haha, yeah, sure, Kojima, a void out. You just think there's no way they'd actually do that, and then when they actually do, you're kind of surprised, kind of shocked that they would go that far to adhere to the rules of the world. But on the other hand, I think it's a bit too far on the side of impractical for the game. I don't mind giving the player consequences for taking the easy way out, for killing enemies that you could have knocked out, but forcing a game over after the inciting event has already happened is a bit absurd. I guess that's what Kojima is known for, the absurd, but it's a bit too far for my tastes. And Death Stranding's gameplay overall is kind of a bit impractical in general. The game isn't made to make things easy or to go smoothly for you. The entire game is in service of how to make your journey a bit longer, a bit tougher, a bit more intense. And I oddly think that that's one of the things that isolates the game a bit from a wider audience. Some people are just never going to want to interface with this type or level of gameplay. But for the people that do enjoy it, it creates a game that focuses in on delivering players the experience and the journey, rather than just getting to the point. The reason that I think this is so important is because a lot of games tend to design gameplay so that you just want to get past it. They deliver the player a large and interesting world and characters to fill that world, but they don't encourage the player to stick around when they're given back control of their character. With that, we can continue with the journey that Sam has set out on. When we first get open control of the game, our goal is to connect the different facilities in this small opening area of the game. This is the East Coast, or the area around Capital Knot City. Our goal is to eventually get to Port Knot City, which can take us out to the wider open world. On the way, though, we can connect the various facilities that exist in between: the way station outside of Central Knot, the distribution center south of Central Knot, the wind farm, and eventually Port Knot City itself. While we're doing this, we'll stop at different facilities to rest in private rooms. Private rooms are an interesting part of the game. While they do tie into gameplay in one major way, recovering all of our stamina meter, they're mostly cosmetic, and interacting with them is optional, but there's quite a few fun little things that we can do here. We can have Sam drink energy drinks to increase the maximum of his stamina meter up to 25%. These are Bridges energy drinks in the director's cut version of the game, but in the original, they were actually Monster energy drinks. You can thankfully mod the game to get this based and epic collaboration back. We can review our terminal here to look at the map, orders, interview data that we receive over the course of the story, or look at mail from other people in the game. Sam can wash his face at the sink, take a shower, use the toilet standing or sitting. Sam can also customize his outfit, backpack, a variety of weapons, and even soothe BB, which will increase our connection level with him. Speaking of BB, as we start to progress through the story and make deliveries, Sam will start to see mysterious memories that must be from BB himself, because they only happen when Sam hooks up to his pod. They are of a strange man who's either often speaking directly to BB or speaking to other people around him. As we eventually get the way stations and distro centers online, we're finally given an order to head to Port Knot City. We must take a variety of different supplies to them, food and materials, as well as sperm and egg samples to introduce genetic diversity into their settlement. I should note that there are two other terminals that we can bring online in this area that are both optional: the Musician and the Ludens fan. You'll notice that the Ludens fan is modeled after Jeff Keighley, the host of the Game Awards and good friend to Hideo Kojima. The Musician is Daiichi Miura, a Japanese singer and songwriter. This is common throughout the game. One-off preppers and terminal owners will just be random celebrities or figures of note. Our journey to Port Knot is our longest one yet. We pass through either many areas harboring BTs or mules. It's an arduous journey all the way from Capital Knot to Port Knot, crossing over mountains and rivers. We eventually make it to the large port city on the water. I think this is the first moment that the game truly shows its hand. When you come over the hill and see the long journey down, it isn't indicative of another trial that we're about to face, but a respite from the climb. We know we're at the end now, and the flat paths down the hillside provoke a sense of solace in the storm. This area comes directly after a small patch filled with BTs, and it's easy to lose yourself in the grind of it all. But when we can finally see the finish line right ahead, it's a beautiful sight. Death Stranding does a fantastic job at coupling these moments with music that perfectly fits the bill. The soundtrack, full of licensed songs from bands like Low Roar, Silent Poets, and Churches, just meshes with the game like it was meant to be. And a lot of these songs are just tracks that Kojima already enjoyed, so he put them in the game. But they almost feel like they were made for this world. When we get to Port Knot City, we meet a man there named Victor. He takes a great interest in the Luden figure that we have attached to our BB. This apparently was Igor's, the man who died in the intro sequence of the game. We find out that Igor was his brother, and their story is further developed through interviews. We find out that these brothers were separated purely by occupation. Victor was working in Port Knot and Igor in Capital. Igor was dreaming of the day when a few years from now his corpse disposal work would be done and he would get to move to Port Knot with his brother. This day obviously would never come, and that connection that they had would be forever lost. Bringing Port Knot City online will now allow the city to chiral print equipment and materials. They'll even be able to print ships eventually. We did still have to bring them supplies because organic materials are among the only things that can't be printed with the chiral network. Since we're at Port Knot, we can now head to Lake Knot City, but the only way there is by boat. Luckily, Fragile Express has the last remaining boat in the port. As we head out though, the man in the golden mask arrives again. This time he introduces himself as Higgs. He's already aware that Bridget died and doesn't think Amelie is ready for the presidency. He plans to get to her first and take her captive.
The girl, for instance, she's not like you or me. Dooms ain't her thing. And she's more into destruction on a worldwide scale. An extinction entity.
Higgs has come here to kill Sam, to cause a void out and destroy another major city. He summons a BT and we have our first boss fight of the game. A lot of the BT boss fights in Death Stranding are the same. There are a few in the game that are actually interesting. Both those two only really come around the finale though. The rest in the middle aren't that great because they're mostly the same. Luckily, all of them except for this one and the final two are optional, and we can just avoid them if we choose to do so. For this one, we have to fight a giant BT that weaves through the tar in the area. It also makes things easier if we stick to the ruined buildings that are surfacing from the substance. We have to fire our Sam blood-loaded weapons towards this thing and damage it until it eventually goes down. Luckily, throughout the fight, different items will wash up from the tar that will assist us. These can be weapons, blood bags to refill our health, or defensive items. Once we finally manage to destroy the BT, we are congratulated on officially being the first person to take down one of these things. This shows just how large of a development Sam is in this world and just how important he is in giving the living a fighting chance. No one up to this point has had any ability to fight back against the BTs. The only thing that they could do was avoid them. But with Sam's blood, they might actually be able to deal with them head on, making travel far easier and just causing less problems in the long run. We then join Fragile in heading off to Lake Knot City, where we'll be able to access the central and western areas of Death Stranding's world. But on the way there, Fragile tells us that she used to work with Higgs. She had a sort of alliance with him, but he stabbed her in the back and turned into what he is today.
So what's your angle? You want to save the world, or you want to fuck it all up like him?
I just wish things were different, all right?
This begins episode 3, Fragile. Before we arrive at Lake Knot, Sam sees Amelie on the beach once again.
I had no idea until you told me. No idea that I was alive. Living is no different from being dead if you're all alone.
She gives Sam a dream catcher and promises to take him halfway home, assumingly back to the world of the living. She once again tells Sam that she can't come back until they're connected. We then arrive in Lake Knot City with a large amount of cargo that we have to carry up the stairs to the distribution terminal. We can then link the city up to the chiral network. Amelie speaks to us through a chiralgram where she tells us about the situation nearby. When her expedition came through this area, a lot of the people were on board with Bridges and joining the chiral network, but since the separatists have started attacking, they've changed their minds. Middle Knot City was nuked, and this has left most people feeling like they'd rather stay out of it than get involved. This shows itself in most of the preppers in the area being far less responsive to connecting with the UCA than the people back east were. We'll be able to make deliveries with them because Fragile has lended us her credentials for the time being. She and her delivery company still have goodwill with the people around here, so it'll go a long way. Fragile wants to help Sam partly because she wants to get back at Higgs for betraying her. When we actually head out of Lake Knot, we can start connecting the other preppers to the network. Just outside of Lake Knot, there's an engineer not too far from a mule camp, the elder that lives up on the mountain, and the craftsman a bit further south. The engineer will connect to the chiral network right away, but the craftsman and the elder, they'll take a bit more convincing. These won't be the last preppers that require a bit more work to get them into the network either. Not everyone is so trusting of Bridges. This doesn't mean that there's that much extra work involved, but it is a slight adjustment. These people generally want to get deliveries from Bridges on the chance that they need something, but they don't want to be connected to the chiral network. They don't want to be actively involved. We usually just have to make an extra delivery or so to prove that connection is actually something that the world needs. Once this happens, they'll agree to join Bridges after all, but making that first delivery to a facility is slightly more difficult than the ones after. This is because without a chiral network connection, we don't get to see online structures that other players have built, and we can't build our own. The first trek through any area will require us to basically go in blind, forging a path through the environment without assistance. If they are a prepper that's more resistant to the idea of the network, then we'll have to make additional deliveries without the assistance of structures. I think that this properly reflects the extra effort that Sam, or we, would have to put in to convince these people of the network's effectiveness. There will be story missions that will reflect this as well, but I think these do a good job at showing this concept early. It's also worth noting that we're not just convincing the preppers that the network is a good thing, but the game is convincing the player, and Sam, that it's a good thing as well. These preppers will also tell us how respected Fragile is in this area of the country. People gave her a lot of credit because she was the only one making deliveries until Higgs started attacking, but there's also rumors that she was involved in the nuclear explosion at Middle Knot. We end up meeting with Fragile herself after a while, who offers us assistance in travel. Fragile is like Sam in that she has dooms, but she also has special abilities. She has a good connection to the beach and can use it to travel long distances very quickly. We can use this to fast travel to locations that have private rooms. We can't take cargo with us though, so we won't be able to cheat deliveries by using this method of travel. Fragile will eventually tell us the truth about what happened at Middle Knot. Her father was a big proponent of the UCA and Bridges' efforts to reconnect the country. She inherited these visions for the future, and eventually when she took over his delivery company, Fragile Express, she ended up making an alliance with Higgs. But when the Separatists started causing trouble, they began slipping packages inside of Fragile's deliveries. These were explosives, and they made her an accomplice to what happened. It made her involved in the destruction that it caused. She felt partly responsible for these attacks and now wants to get back at Higgs. She doesn't care about Bridges, about the UCA, she just wants revenge, and to further her father's legacy. After this, we'll hear from Deadman, who has begun to look into BB-28's history and the history of the BBs in general. He's doing this because of the persistent memories that Sam is seeing when connecting to this BB. This all happens once we reach the distro center south of Lake Knot City. From here, we have to carve out a path further to start to connect more terminals to the network and eventually make our way to South Knot City. We can connect the weather station, which will give us access to weather reports and data that can predict when timefall will hit certain areas. We can use this function from our map, but I'll be honest, I rarely ever used this feature in the game. It made far less sense to try and predict where timefall would arrive than to just push through it and repair my cargo on the other side. We can then connect to the Timefall farmers, probably one of the most interesting preppers in the entire game. Learning about how they use Timefall to grow their crops is really interesting and introduces a ton of questions about the applications of this odd weather in this world. We eventually get a delivery request for the junk dealer, a man that's in a lone shelter in the middle of some large rocky hills. He's probably the most reluctant of the preppers that we've met so far, but he has a good reason to be. The love of his life died in the explosion at Middle Knot. He blames this death on Bridges and Fragile. Before this, he worked in communications repair and was very good at his job, but since then he only deals in junk, leaving his old career behind. He clearly wants nothing to do with the network or the UCA, but we can't simply convince him by fulfilling a couple orders. Fragile does some digging in the records and actually finds out that his girlfriend never died. He, of course, doesn't believe this at first, but we can find her at a nearby shelter, the chiral artist's studio, her mother's studio. Apparently, her mother had told her a lie, that the junk dealer died in the explosion. They both thought the other was dead, primarily because her mother didn't like the junk dealer and wanted them to stay separate. We can actually take her back to the junk dealer's shelter, where the two get a touching reunion. The junk dealer had given her an hourglass as a gift, one that didn't work anymore. He used to be a repairman, and because he doesn't need any more junk, she decides to destroy the hourglass, a sign that they're moving on. It also seems pretty important that the hourglass is a representation of time that's stopped. The hourglass destroyed could mean that time has begun to move for them again. When they were apart, it's like the world ceased to move, but now it can go on once again. The woman then proposes to the junk dealer and they decide to connect to the network, grateful that they're back together again because of Sam, because of the UCA. I should also note here that over the course of the game, Sam begins to make a name for himself. When we aren't dealing with preppers that don't want a part of the network, we're dealing with people who genuinely respect the job we're doing and are thankful for the deliveries. These people are far more common than the random curmudgeonly old man. We then get a delivery to take supplies to South Knot City, another major delivery that requires us to travel quite far. But before we leave, a Bridges worker tells us that a package was mislabeled and it was meant to be put in the shipment. This package actually turns out to be a small nuclear bomb, and the Bridges worker was actually Higgs in disguise. Up to his old tricks again, that little rascal. We can tell that the package is a bomb because if we look at the cargo screen, it's clearly labeled as one, and the description reads very clear instructions, that if we deliver the bomb to South Knot City, or if Sam gets too far from it, it will explode. I honestly can't remember if this was obvious or not when I first played the game. This time around, I knew that it was coming, so I wasn't really surprised. I knew that I had to consult Fragile to figure out how to deal with it, but I think maybe the reveal would have hit a little bit better if the game wasn't as clear with what it was doing. Again, maybe I just had remembered too much about the game and it's not as obvious to new players. When we do contact Fragile, she helps us deal with the explosive by taking it to the nearby tar pits. We have to toss it into the tar and this will smother its explosion, preventing the bomb from doing any damage to the nearby city. With this, Sam and Fragile overlook the tar pits and have a conversation about the incident. This attempted terrorist attack is pretty similar to what happened at Middle Knot. Higgs snuck an explosive inside of Fragile's cargo and the city was destroyed. Fragile feels like she's been brought back to that event and decides to tell Sam what really happened that day. After Middle Knot had been destroyed, Higgs took Fragile captive and forced her to make a choice. She could save herself by sacrificing the city, or she could sacrifice her skin by walking the bomb to the nearby tar pits herself. Because Higgs required that she do this unclothed, the timefall in the vicinity would destroy her body. The only thing that he wanted her to keep was her face, to ensure that everyone would know who was involved in destroying Middle Knot. He wanted to break her reputation and destroy the rest of her in the process. Of course, Fragile decided to save the other city by running with the bomb. Her skin was aged ahead, the timefall making it speed up its degradation.
Because I'm fragile, but I'm not that fragile.
This resulted in South Knot actually being saved at the end of the day. It could have been a lot worse, but Fragile was a hero. After this, we can head to South Knot City and bring it online. Amelie contacts Sam to tell him something important, but the call quickly cuts out as a huge storm arrives in the area. This begins episode 4, Younger. Sam heads out into the storm and is swept away into a tornado, only to be transported to a World War II battlefield with shades of soldiers fighting in a never-ending conflict. Here we get our first battle against Younger, the man that we've previously seen in BB's memory sequences. It seems to be his father, or at least someone that took care of him in the past. Younger has some strange control over this battlefield though. He's able to summon soldiers to fight for him at will. We usually have to take him down 3 times with some form of ranged weapon or grenade. We also need to take down his skeletal veterans as well, but once we do this enough, Younger will be defeated and Sam will return back to the place that he was whisked away from. When he gets back though, Mama says that his comms only cut out for a minute or so. He wasn't gone that long, even though Sam felt like he had been gone for an hour. It's a strange anomaly and no one really has any answers at this point. Shortly after this, Mama requests that Sam visit her in her lab. Shortly after the 4th episode began, we begin episode 5, Mama. Her lab isn't too far away from South Knot, so we don't have to make too much of a trek. Mama has been pretty instrumental in our team thus far. She has developed a lot of weapons for Sam and just provided generally new equipment across the board, but we haven't had a chance to actually meet her yet. When we do, we see that she has a BT of a child attached to her by an umbilical cord. She doesn't explain much to Sam as it doesn't seem like she really wants to talk about it, but this is her child. Mama was giving birth to her child when the terrorists attacked the hospital. She was pinned under the rubble and gave birth there. The baby had passed and she saw the BT in the space. It's now permanently connected to her and she can't leave this place. Sam chastises her a bit for not moving on, but Mama doesn't really take this from him and points out the hypocrisy in his statements.
I mean, you know she's gone. You want to live your life in the shadow of the dead?
Come on. You, of all people, you chose the dead over the living. Why else would you be here?
Mama has been looking into the storm, which she says disappeared in less than a second. She wants to pull more data from Sam's cufflinks. She thinks that Sam must have been trapped between different time spaces, maybe some possible connection to the beach. In addition to this, we have another problem. The chiral density in the area has been much higher than Mama thought it would be after connecting all these new terminals to the network. This density of chirality could cause some phenomena because of a closer connection to the beach. It could even cause another Death Stranding if it gets too high. Because of this, Mama has developed a new version of the Cupid that contains a limiter. She needs to rewrite the software though, which Mama can't do. A woman named Lochna helped her develop the device originally, with Mama working on the engineering and Lochna working on the software, so we'll need to find her. We then head out to leave Mama to her work. She needs to figure out more about the chiral spikes, but in the meantime, we can keep connecting facilities to the network. Our next big city that needs connecting is Mountain Knot. This requires us to head into the next major area of the world, the mountainous region. We can initially head up this way through a valley that's nearby the craftsman's location. All of the other ways up the mountain are far more treacherous and we aren't quite ready to tackle them just yet. So we head up this valley, connect another way station, deal with a mule camp that's not really mules but terrorists, and head to another distro center. The distro center actually has an emergency. Someone has been hurt and they need supplies. When we first find out about this, we think it's an accident, but it's quickly refuted once we get to the distro center. They tell us it was really an attack from the separatists. Once here, we finally get word again from Amelie. She found a way to contact Sam. Higgs has arrived at Edge Knot City. He's destroyed the place and killed everyone there, and now BTs are swarming the area. Deadman then updates us on his research into the BB program. Apparently, Bridges weren't the first ones to bring back the BB tech. It disappeared after initial experiments were done into the technology, but we now learn that the Separatists had started to use this BB tech first, 3 years ago when Bridges first started heading west. They wanted to use BBs to track BTs and direct them towards Bridges. This caused the organization to fight fire with fire and use their own version of the technology. BB-28, our BB, might have been commissioned for that very reason, but Deadman can't quite tell because things have been scrubbed from the record.
I always found it strange that we were so willing to utilize technology we barely understood. Now we know why. We've been aping methods and techniques employed by others from the start.
The original BB experiments started around the time of the Death Stranding. They were conducted on the island of Manhattan on the East Coast. The island was eventually obliterated by a void-out, which is why the experiments were shut down. This void-out killed the original president, and Bridget Strand was put into office since she was the vice at the time. The experiments were then covered up and somehow the Separatists resurrected this technology years later. So how did they get the tech? How was the BB tech developed in the first place? Why did Bridges start using it again? We have a lot of questions, and Deadman promises to continue finding more answers. Sam then is sent off to head to Mountain Knot City, connecting another major spot to the chiral network. He must bring another antimatter bomb because the city is currently dealing with a tar pit that's encroaching on their territory. It could threaten to swallow the entire city, so it's a big problem. Once we get there, Sam speaks to a woman who seems to be Mama. She looks and sounds just like her, but it isn't. It's actually Lochna, the woman who needs to help us with the Cupid. She basically tells us to fuck off though because she wants no part of the UCA. She thinks that the network we're connecting people to has bad stuff in it. Lochna is actually Mama's sister, and they were inseparable for a long time. Some even theorized that they had telepathic abilities. They both have dooms and are scientific geniuses, Mama with engineering and Lochna with software. This is how they worked together on building the Cupid, but something happened between the two of them and now they no longer speak. We still need Mountain Knot City in the network though, because without it, the string of facilities won't be able to reach to Edge Knot City. We now need to head back and speak with Mama to figure out what's kept these two apart. This means heading back down the mountain and back to her lab. When we get there, she tells us that the baby she had was actually Lochna's. She had always wanted kids, but they were two halves of one whole. Lochna had problems with her uterus, and Mama couldn't produce eggs. Lochna was in love with a Bridges member who had passed away, and the depression from this incident had caused her to drift further and further away from her sister. She decided to offer to carry Lochna's child, hoping that it would bring her sister back. After the terrorist attack, their bond was severed. Mama is now chained to this place because of the BT, and Lochna doesn't know what happened at all. She thinks that Mama just ran away from her with the child.
You have to break some ties to forge others. Can't be tied to everything.
Mama determines that it's time to leave, that she has to reconnect with her sister, and to do that, she has to leave her child. This, of course, ties back to the theme of connection that the game has, but it's also a massive development for Mama herself. Her story is one of tragedy, but also of prolonged running away from her issues. She's always known what she has to do, but now she's almost forced to make the decision. If she doesn't do this, Lochna will never trust the UCA and the chiral network will stay half complete. If she does this, then she loses this child, but gains her other half back. Mama decides to let us cut the cord and she can now leave the lab. We then have to head back to Mountain Knot City with Mama as the cargo. But before we leave, Higgs arrives once again to sour the party. He summons giant BTs for us to fight, ones that are more akin to cats or dogs, some type of animal or beast in form. Again, we can avoid these battles if we'd like, and I specifically had to run away with this one because I didn't have any weapons on me at the time, and the game doesn't provide you with any additional ones. On our way up the mountain, Mama tells us about her connection to Lochna. She talks about how she remembers her own birth and being with Lochna in the womb. They could always feel each other's emotions, and they even shared a beach. Their original vision for the chiral network was a system that could give everyone the level of connection that they had, or at least some version of it. When Mama arrives, the sisters both apologize to each other, realizing their misunderstanding, and Lochna finally agrees to fix the Cupid so that it has a limiter. Lochna pretty quickly found out that someone must have tweaked the code in the Cupid. Things get even crazier shortly after this when we realize that Mama actually died in the rubble. The only reason that she was still functioning was because of the child's BT that she was connected to. She kept one of her cuffs always loose so that no one would notice her vitals had dropped. Her soul had already passed on to the other side, to the beach, but her body was still here. Now that she's reunited with Lochna, the two have become one, like they always wanted. Whenever we see Lochna, it's actually a whole version of Malingan, Mama's real name, and Lochna. The two sisters have become connected once again. With this, Mountain Knot City is on the chiral network, and we can begin connecting facilities in the surrounding area. We will need to seek out Heartman, a researcher in the area who could tell us more about the battlefield that we visited in the storm. He happens to be an expert on beaches, and the battlefield that we visited is theorized to be some sort of collective beach. Before we can do this, though, we have a big problem. BB, who Sam has now started referring to as Lou, has begun to malfunction. This starts at the beginning of episode 6, Dead Man. BBs are supposed to be halfway between the living and halfway between the dead, existing in both worlds. But because Lou has started to take a liking to Sam, he started to lean more towards the side of the living. This means he won't function as effectively and will eventually stop working. He's starting to become a living child, gaining weight and accumulating memories. He can't even exist outside of the pod, or there's a 70% chance he'll die. Deadman needs to take him in and recalibrate him, but Sam also needs to stay away from him so that Lou can cross back a bit closer to the side of the dead. This means that we can't use Lou for a bit and need to connect some facilities to the network without him. And this section of the game presents a huge change in gameplay for 2 reasons. The first is that since we don't have Lou, we're going in blind on most areas with BTs. We no longer have the assistance of our friend, so we can't spot out exactly where the BTs are. We have to take these sections much slower, and it helps a ton to hold our breath longer. And this is a classic example of absence makes the heart grow fonder. The game actively wants you to like Lou. It wants you to develop a connection with Lou, just like you are connecting the UCA. Sam is finding another being that he actually cares about, and we care about him all the same. Sam will often talk to Lou, saying short little phrases to him while we're out delivering cargo. When we trip or fall, we might shock Lou, bringing his meter at the bottom of the screen a bit lower. We can stop him from crying by rocking him to make him feel better. We can soothe him in the private room. There's all manner of things that we can do to increase our connection with him, but the biggest way to do this for the player is the utility that Lou provides. Once you remove the utility of the Odra deck and prevent the player from having the ability to spot BTs, maybe they become a bit annoyed, not at Lou himself, but at the game. They become annoyed at the game for taking away Lou from us. This utility quickly crosses over into genuine concern. Are we upset that the game is a bit harder for a section, or are we concerned for another character? We can't tell, and Sam probably can't either. The lines between compassion and annoyance have become blurred, and they are effectively the same thing in the end. This type of thing has gone back to just about every game that Kojima has made. He's always wanted the player to feel closer to the main character. And just as Sam is growing closer to Lou, we are as well. And how can you not feel for this thing? Sure, a baby in a pod is sort of a freakish bit of imagery, but it's innocent. It knows not the conflict that it's involved in, its place in this world, its importance. It just exists in the pod, and its intuition and abilities help us where it can. It's something that ultimately needs to be protected. The other reason why we see such a shocking change in gameplay during the mountain section of the game is the snow that we'll have to deal with and the introduction of zip lines. A lot of the areas surrounding Mountain Knot are covered in snow. It's far harder to trek through the snow than it is on open land. We move a lot slower, and the snowfall acts just like the timefall rain that we've seen before, degrading our cargo particularly fast and wearing down its contents. We can get a pair of augmented legs that will reduce the effect that snow has on our movement speed, which is basically essential for this part of the game. But the biggest development that will help us weather the cold are zip lines. Up until this point in the game, there has been one distinct way to increase travel time from facility to facility. Obviously, building structures and taking the best equipment we can makes journeys far easier. And this is the goal in the end, not only connecting facilities to each other, but making the path to each facility as simple and quick as possible, so that we can deliver more cargo. Efficiency is literally the name of the game. Before I would call Death Stranding a delivery game or a walking simulator, I would knight its new genre an efficiency game. Before we unlock ziplines, the best way to shorten routes is actually to build roads. Once we reach the western section of the world, we can find auto-pavers located throughout the different zones in the game. These auto-pavers require a ton of materials, but once we provide them, a road will be constructed in its place. These roads make travel so much faster, especially when using a vehicle. We don't have to worry about terrain, we mostly don't have to worry about mules or BTs, and our batteries stay charged while on the road, so we don't need to fret over electricity either. We can also load a ton of cargo inside a vehicle, so it makes completing a bunch of deliveries all at once incredibly simple. But these roads only go so far. Not every road comes into contact with every facility. The roads also generally tend to end once we get into the mountains. They go through the mountains and can get us there well, but they don't connect all of the facilities. This is where zip lines come in, and we really start to need them a lot more once we get to Mountain Knot. Zip lines can be set up in most areas and can connect to other zip lines in range that aren't obstructed by obstacles in their path. Once at least 2 are set up, we can zip from one structure to the next. If we manage to set up a whole network of zip lines, then we can effectively deliver packages with barely any effort at all. Of course, constructing an entire zipline network across the map takes time and probably won't be something you'll do during the story, but it will be effective when maxing out all of the facilities and their connection levels during the post-game. In the mountains, though, it's almost mandatory because we'll have so much to do, and traveling through the snow without Lou will make things incredibly difficult. Deadman does reveal some more information about the BB experiments to Sam, though. He's found out that after Manhattan was destroyed, the BB experiments were continued on the order of Bridget Strand. She also wanted to use the BB tech to travel to the beach, but these efforts didn't work out. Deadman is suspicious of Die Hard Man because he showed up around this time. When he became the director, he was already wearing a mask and no one knows what he really looks like. All the data from these events are highly classified, but with the chiral network, Deadman might be able to piece together archival information. To this end, and to the end of getting Lou back in the field, we need to connect the surrounding terminals to the chiral network. This involves the Mountaineer, a man and his wife who live high up in the mountains and are having issues with his wife's pregnancy. We eventually connect the Doctor as well, who can help the couple without leaving his shelter as long as we deliver the Mountaineer a revolutionary device that allows the Doctor to treat the patient from afar. We also connect the photographer and the spiritualist, who both have some interesting things to say about the chiral network, the Death Stranding, and BTs in general. The spiritualist thinks that chiralium and the phenomena of Death Stranding have existed inside of the Earth for as long as it has existed. She believes that pyramids and ancient structures were built on these mountains as a way to access the fonts of power within the Earth. The photographer has even more developments, but less metaphysical and more scientific. She found images of cave paintings that are 30,000 years old. Hartman analyzes them, showing that the paintings could be of BTs. This leads him into the large theory that will theme the rest of the game. There were 5 large extinctions at points in the past. These are real extinctions that scientists theorized happened at some point in Earth's history. One of these happened at the end of the Cretaceous period, 65 million years ago, that killed off the dinosaurs. Since these cave paintings seemingly show proof of BTs, it seems that the Death Stranding could have happened before. Hartman wants to connect to the network as well so that he can analyze more information like this and hopefully develop a theory on these extinctions and where the Death Stranding came from. Before we can do this, though, we need to head back to Mountain Knot because BB is up and running again. When there, we begin episode 7, Cliff, as another massive storm has appeared in the area and Sam is swept away, this time to a World War II battleground. As we run across the war ground, we run into Deadman, who also got swept up in the storm. He luckily has BB waiting for us so that we can use the Odra deck again.
Sam, it's not easy being me. No wife, no children, no friends. And so I sought solace, sought company in the dead. Over time, I made them a part of me, 70% of who I am today. But meeting you has opened my eyes. You're very special, Sam.
Deadman has started to find some sort of connection to Sam, something to look forward to.
You know, Sam, I'm starting to understand why BB is so important to you.
Huh?
It's just a tool. Life and death are supposed to be irrelevant. But we've got attached to each other all the same, haven't we?
Deadman's connection makes him start to understand the relationship between Sam and Lou a little more. This is important because throughout most of the story, Deadman has viewed the BBs as tools. He talks about them as if they're a mere wrench rather than a living thing. He even chastises Sam for his fondness of the BB earlier in the game. And you can't blame Deadman for taking this view. He takes a scientific approach to the BBs, not an emotional one. He has to keep this distance from them, otherwise his job will be harder to do. And this is another consequence of the lack of connection in society. People split apart, people distanced, people are socially removed. But before these two can have their big touching moment, we have to take care of the combat soldier once again. This fight is pretty similar to the first, just with a change in environment. We have to take out Younger and his soldiers a few times. We can use grenades to our advantage here since most of them tend to stay bunched up in formation. Once we're done with this, Deadman tells us that he thinks the battleground could be some specific beach made for soldiers who died in battle. It seems to be a sort of Valhalla for the modern warrior, eternally fighting like they did in life. Sam then once again finds himself back in his private room. He's been out for a whole day, but now we at least have Lou back. After the conversation with Deadman, he went digging into Sam's records and figured out why he picked the name Lou. We find out that Sam had a wife 10 years ago. She was pregnant with their daughter, but she died and caused a massive void out. Sam survived the attack through repatriation, and rumors started to circulate that he was at fault. He ended up cutting everyone off and leaving Bridges because he didn't want their reputation to be damaged by what happened. Sam gets upset at Deadman for bringing up his past, and this way of approaching things is pretty detached. Imagine not knowing your friend's past, so instead of asking them, you just dig through public records to figure out what happened to them. It's kind of a fucked up thing to do, but honestly, this happens a lot in Death Stranding. I assume this has to be because the world in Death Stranding has become so removed from emotional connection that they aren't aware of these social norms anymore. If the information is out there, what harm is there in looking it up? Deadman isn't entirely cold, though. He reveals a bit of his own past as well in this scene. Deadman was grown from stem cells, and when the spark of life did not manifest in his body, his organs were replaced with those of the dead, from cadavers. He doesn't have a birthday. He has a body, but no soul, no ka. Since he has no soul, there's nowhere for him to go after death, no beach, no afterlife. It must be strange to exist in a world where the afterlife is no longer a question, where it's known what comes after death, but to be completely cut off from it. To be told that you can't go there, you have no place where the dead lie.
You didn't have to cut all ties and walk away. The president was right about that much.
Wasn't anything to walk away from. It's not like I was ever welcome there.
Come on, even I was welcome.
Deadman almost seems to express a bit of jealousy for what Sam had here. He knows that Sam was welcome at Bridges more than anyone, that he could have made a home there, but he left it. And to feel eternally out of place in a world and to see someone squander those connections must be difficult to grapple with. But we still have the mystery of the battlefield beach to solve. Why are these soldiers fighting in battlefields, never ending? And who is the man on the beach that's looking for BB? Deadman has found out that his name is Clifford Younger, based on the dog tags that Sam brought back with him. Hartman also furthers the theory that the war zone is a beach. He thinks that when people die at the same time, especially in large number, their beaches can get entangled. We now need to meet up with Hartman and bring him the dog tags we found so that he can give us some more answers. We also need to bring him Mama's body, as he wants to study it since it has not decomposed at all. Before we leave, we get a pretty emotional scene when Lochna has to let Mama's body go. Or I guess I should say when Lochna and Mama have to let their own body go. I never said it wasn't confusing, alright? Sam leaves Mountain Knot, trudging through the snow to find Hartman's home, located on a small crater lake. This crater lake, I should note, is shaped like a heart on the map, or depending on which way you look at it, is shaped like nuts. So there's that. Anyways, when we get into Hartman's lab, we find him laying on a table with a countdown ticking away on the bottom right of the screen. Hartman actually has a condition that causes his heart to stop beating every 21 minutes. When this happens, he dies for 3 minutes and spends this time searching for his dead wife and child on the beach. His beach is a little different than other people's. He can actually connect to others, allowing him to search for his family. He looks for them because he wants to be sure that he'll move on to the afterlife with them. He doesn't want to get stuck in his beach alone forever. This is a sad and tragic fate for one man, a man that loved his family so much that he can't seem to move on at all. He's not truly living a life, he's living the shadow of one. He has compiled a library of media that can be consumed in 21 minutes, but this is really no way to enjoy the world.
My body may be present, but my soul is on the beach. I'm already dead.
I know that feeling. Lost my family in an accident.
Hartman will tell us that he was having heart surgery and his wife took his daughter back to the house. They were lost in the voidouts and this caused a power outage in the hospital. During this time, he flatlined and could see his wife and child for a brief moment. But before he could reach them, the generator kicked back on and he was back to life. This traumatic experience could have been the inciting incident that caused him to live this shell of a life. It turns out, though, that Deadman snuck something into the cargo that Sam delivered. It's a small piece of an umbilical cord. Hartman wants to analyze it and see if it decomposes. Hartman also has a theory about Younger, that the strength of his emotions has allowed him to stick around, that he is leading an eternal quest to look for BB, or Lou. Higgs could also be behind this, though. He could be controlling the man and using his emotions to sow discord. During the conversation, Hartman dies again and we have to wait for him to wake up. Luckily, during this time, we can look around his room and get a better sense of who he is. Hartman ultimately wants us to check out some of the nearby prepper stations, to bring them back online, but also to find out some of the information that they're working on. Most of the people this high in the mountains are researchers that are working on developing better theories on what caused the Death Stranding in the first place. This area contains some of the only known fossils from the period during which the dinosaurs died out. Our next overarching goal is to get to the tar pits near Edge Knot City and reassemble the chiral relay there. Once we do that, we can finally head to Edge Knot and get Amelie back for good. We have to connect the researchers, though, who are all investigating something pertaining to the Big Five extinctions from the past. The paleontologist is investigating a 200 million year old ammonite, which seems to be still alive. It even had an umbilical cord, so once we retrieve it, he sends images to Hartman. The Evo Devo biologist is investigating the tar specifically. She thinks that the tar is the key to the Death Stranding and the BTs. Extinction factors, parts of the DNA that disadvantage organisms to changes in their environment, could be located in the tar. The geologist has found chiral deposits that go back 65 million years, evidence of ancient Death Strandings, and this could match up with what the spiritualist said, that the chiralium has been a part of Earth for a very long time. When we get back to Hartman, he reveals that the child that Mama kept in the lab was actually her own soul, her own Ka, that failed to separate her body at death. Hartman seems like he's about to go for another trip to the beach, but tells us that he's modified the log times so that no one would listen to their conversation. Once they aren't listening in, he tells Sam that the umbilical cord from before was taken off of Bridget Strand, the president herself. It was outside her body and seems to be frozen in time. There are no signs of necrosis or decomposition. Hartman's theory is that this cord was connected to the beach, that the appearance of beaches and Death Strandings correspond with extinction-level events. He shows images of different extinct beings, all found with umbilical cords outside their bodies. He thinks these are EEs, or extinction entities. It's possible that the president could have been one, and even Higgs said that Amelie was one. Higgs could have taken her captive to start an extinction-level event. This is all being kept from Die Hard Man because neither Deadman or Hartman are sure that they can trust him at this point. He was too close to Bridget during her life, and they still don't even know his real identity. After this, Sam is told to head to the chiral relay at the edge of the tar belt. This is our last stop before Edge Knot City. We find the remnants of the relay that was recently consumed by tar, something that looks like it was ripped straight out of Evangelion, a mechanical destroyed cross hovering above a sea of void. And don't worry, this game is about to get a whole lot more Evangelion before we're finished here. But the only way to get to Edge Knot is across the tar, and Sam can't cross it on foot. We aren't given a ton of direction unless we start to take a really long time, but we actually need to get caught by nearby BTs. They'll drag us through the tar and take us to the other side, where we'll have to outrun BTs in a sea of tar before we make it to Edge Knot City. We meet Higgs again, who talks about masks. He refers to Amelie directly as Death and wants to race to see who can get to her first. This begins episode 9, Higgs. When we get to Edge Knot City, we can bring the distro center online and make our final steps towards the last terminal that we'll bring online. Before we head out, Amelie calls us. She gives us some cryptic information that her real name is Amerigo, after Amerigo Vespucci, the man who claimed to have discovered America but hadn't. She's currently on the beach where she was born, and she doesn't think Higgs can find her there. She also tells Sam that everything he said is true, that she is an extinction entity, before leaving him in the dark once again. We then take our final cargo to Edge Knot. It's a simple delivery and activation key that we need to bring the terminal online. We have to make a pretty straight path through the city, weaving across completely destroyed buildings in an empty town. This place is basically just a crater at this point. Nothing is left and no one is here. We also encounter a new type of BT, these jellyfish monsters that hover in the sky. They'll float towards Sam and try to explode. They're easily taken out by shooting them, but if they're too close to us, they can cause a lot of havoc. Once we get to the final terminal, we've completed our goal. The chiral network is done. We've made a journey from the East Coast to the West. We've driven cars, abandoned them, met people, built zip lines, installed infrastructure, left buildings, killed BTs, died, lived. This is certainly an achievement, but it doesn't really feel like one, because a confrontation is waiting for us outside. Amelie tells Sam pretty bluntly that she is the extinction entity. It seems like Higgs was after her for this purpose all along. He needed a complete chiral network to seal the deal, and we just finished it for him. It was sort of a trap anyways. We played right into his hand, another pawn in a larger game. His extinction event is going to rival all of the others. The Big Five will be dwarfed by what this will do to humanity. He's going to merge every beach into one and end the world of the living with it. Amelie was created for this purpose, and she's where Dooms comes from in the first place. It's her gift to people like Sam and Higgs. We then have to battle against a massive BT that Higgs has summoned in the middle of Edge Knot City. We have to manage actually doing damage to the BT while destroying the hordes of jellyfish he sends our way and avoiding attacks from it at the same time. It's a pretty hectic fight, and a lot of that comes from the fact that we have such a little area to run around in. We're barely able to move while this enormous beast closes in on our position even further, slowly inching towards us. It makes this whole thing feel claustrophobic. After we destroy this thing, Higgs invites Sam to Amelie's beach for one final showdown, one last fight to settle this thing. We have to contact Fragile so that she can take us there. She's sending us in without weapons and without Lou. We'll be going in blind. We find Higgs on the beach and Amelie is there with him.
So, no BTs, no void outs, no bullshit. Just a good old-fashioned boss fight. Stick versus rope. Gun versus strand. One more ending before the end. One last game over.
We have a final boss battle with Higgs that lasts 2 phases. First, we have to defeat him in this little area that he's constructed. There's discarded cargo laying all over the ground, some references to Sony itself with PlayStation consoles that we can pick up. We can use these to attack Higgs while making a point to avoid his gunfire. Once we get up and close, we can do some damage to him, and we can even avoid his melee attacks by using our strand to deflect them. But during the second phase, Sam and Higgs fight in the water. We get a classic-style side-scrolling fighter sequence here. It feels like an ode to video games. It feels like a direct callback to the video game references that Higgs would make throughout the game, and it also feels like an homage to Kojima's previous ending fight sequence in Metal Gear Solid 4. Either way, it's ending like most Kojima games have ended, with a badass hand-to-hand fight. The battle isn't that complicated overall. We can dodge, block, and punch. During certain moments, we can stop the fight to snag a crypto biote and regain some health. It's a wonderful little sequence that ends the feud that these two had, a feud that's been mostly one-sided. We'll examine Higgs' character a little bit more in depth shortly, but before we do that, the finale of the game is on the horizon. After this fight, Sam is quickly reunited with Amelie. Fragile arrives as well, with Lou in tow. She gives Sam Higgs' mask, and Sam keeps his promise to let Fragile deliver the killing blow to the man she has a grudge with. She offers to take Sam back with her, but Amelie dismisses this. Sam doesn't need Fragile anymore. He has Amelie. Fragile feels displaced because of this statement. She found an alliance in Sam. He brought her all the way here, right in front of the thing that she wanted so badly, revenge. But now she feels dejected by him, tossed aside since he got what he wanted from her. Amelie then tells Sam that she lied to him. She went to visit him when he was back out east. She never needed rescuing. She lied to get him to come here. It was Die Hard Man's idea in the first place.
Great. So I'm Mario and you're Princess Peach. You're right. I never gave a shit about this country. I have no ties to anything or anyone but you.
I'm so sorry, Sam. But it all worked out in the end.
As the two run along the beach, we see another scene of Die Hard Man confronting Bridget Strand on a beach. He's ready to shoot her, but is cut off by Younger. He seems to recognize Die Hard Man as someone from his past, someone named John. He wants his child back, but Die Hard Man tells him that he's looking in the wrong place. We then jump back to Sam, who is in a private room. Amelie sent him back east of the tar belt. She hasn't shown herself, but she left a message with the UCA. I'm going to finish what Bridget started. Deadman hasn't spoken to the director, and after hearing what Sam saw on the beach, he could have headed there to carry out some plan. Sam's new goal is to head all the way back east. Fragile hasn't been able to transport anyone else. She's drained and been sending people back to Capital Knot to keep them safe. Everyone is there now, but she can't send Sam to Amelie's beach until he gets back to the city. That means that the final cargo we have to deliver is Sam himself. We have to make a massive trek all the way from the tar belt near Edge Knot City to Capital Knot City, where we started the game. This journey can be pretty long, and at first it seems daunting, but it isn't exactly like that. This journey is more of a display of how far we've actually come. Retracing our steps through the mountains and back through the area south of Lake Knot is a reframing of everything that we've done before. And if you haven't been breezing through the story at a quick pace, then this journey actually won't be that hard. You'll have access to a ton of equipment, you'll be connected to the network and have tons of online structures, as well as structures that you've built yourself. And this won't just show the length of the journey that we've been on, but also the change that we've made across the country. This would understandably further to inspire Sam, to show him what he's done in this time and how the connection to the chiral network has helped people, but it will also show the player this as well, convincing them of the advantages of connection overall. But while this is going on, we're also being informed by Deadman on the information he found out about BBs. It's quite the info dump, so get ready for a lot of information. Apparently Younger, the man that we've been fighting on the beach battlefields, was involved in the early stages of the BB experiments. These experiments were not originally devised as a way to detect BTs. That was just a cover story. They were originally used to develop the chiral network. A BB was therefore planted into the infrastructure of every city and terminal across the UCA. Amelie was most likely installing them as she headed west.
Carrying out her mother's grand plan. Making sacrifice after sacrifice on the altar of progress.
Strand may have cursed herself in the pursuit of a bigger, more connected world. Younger was connected to the experiments because he put his child in the care of the scientists that were conducting the original experiments. He wasn't aware of what they were really doing with his kid, though. When he figured out what was actually going on, he tried to reclaim Lou, but it's possible that this pursuit is what ultimately killed him. He's now trying to bring about the last stranding to get his child back for good. In addition to this, Die Hard Man is somehow connected to him. To get to someone else's beach, you generally have to have some sort of deep connection with them. Die Hard Man doesn't have any records of being connected to Amelie. In fact, all of his records and past have been scrubbed. So to get to the beach with Younger and Bridget, he must be connected to Younger himself. Deadman's working theory is that there's a beach above everyone else's, controlling them all. It's possibly Amelie's beach, which Younger could be using to bring about the last stranding. He's trying to get revenge against this world for taking his child. This is our final battle against Cliff Younger as we track him and his soldiers down throughout a now Vietnam-like battlefield. The tactics change here as well. We're to fight a more guerrilla warfare focused battle. Soldiers will hide in the brush and attack us from points that we can't see. Once we finally take Cliff down, he realizes he has lost. He tries to reach BB a few times, clearly drawn to the child, and the child seems to recognize him.
Are you the father?
They told me your name was Sam Porter. But you were Sam Bridges. My bridge to the future. Sam, you bring people together. You're their bridge to the future. Come on, Sam. Stand up.
Younger seems to relent at this point, giving Sam the dog tags and telling him to leave with BB. There's a bit more to the scene that we don't see just yet, but at least for now, Younger won't be a problem anymore. We see another memory from BB. Younger is talking to John in this facility. He seems to be planning some sort of escape for the two. Sam then wakes back up, having been thrown into Port Knot City. Sam, speaking to Deadman, posits the theory that Younger could be Lou's real father, but this wouldn't make any sense because of when BB was born. Sam didn't get any negative connotation when he talked to Cliff. It just seemed like he was looking for his child. There must be some connection between Cliff, the director, and the president. There's a message from Die Hard Man that was left before he went to the beach titled, "If I Don't Come Back." He was offered transport to Amelie's beach. He had never met her in person. She had no past and no records. Mama and Heartman never met her in person either, and anyone that was with her in Edge Knot City was wiped out. It's possible that Amelie might not even be real. Sam is the only person to have actually met her, but it was on her own beach. The official story was always that Amelie was Bridget's child, that she had a medical condition that kept her bedridden for years, but as she grew older, she was cured and could move around. She could travel to and from the beach by the time she was 20 because her dooms were unlike anything they had ever seen. Die Hard Man found out later that Bridges couldn't even have kids. She had uterine cancer. So who is Amelie? Where did she come from? This is why Die Hard Man headed to her beach, to see if he could get some answers to these questions.
I'm gonna stop what she started by stopping her. One last confession. I'm just a man. No powers, nothing special. Don't have dooms, I can't repatriate like Sam either. Don't know the first thing about dying, I had never tried it. Yeah. I've been to hell. Every single battlefield was hell. But no matter how terrible it got, I never died. Because all I ever did was run from death.
This then begins episode 12, Bridges. Fragile talked to Higgs after we left the beach. She gave him the choice to live on the beach forever or to die, and he took the only option that kept him alive. But she made him talk. Apparently, Amelie has been the one in control this whole time. She's an extinction entity, and this was all a part of her plan. She was even the one that gave Higgs his powers. This was why he betrayed Fragile in the first place, because Amelie was stronger and could help him complete his goals more than she could. He even told Fragile that they weren't using BBs. They had dolls inside of their pods. No babies were ever used. The idea that the terrorists had brought back the BB tech was a lie, a cover-up. But our journey still isn't finished quite yet. We need to make it back to Capital Knot, and we're still at Port Knot City. We need to get to Amelie's beach and figure out what's going on. This leg of the journey is probably the most difficult. We have to carry cargo this time, a package full of cryptobiotes. Fragile has drained herself transporting people across the country and needs these bugs to get back on her feet. We can't let the cryptobiotes be submerged in water, though. This normally wouldn't be a massive hurdle to overcome, but this part of the coast is crawling with BTs at this point. We will be met with multiple BT bosses over the course of our trip, and eventually, right before we arrive at the city, we have to fight the final boss of the game, a massive giant whale BT that flies around the sky and hurls projectiles at us. It's important that we stay on the ruined buildings that have risen out of the tar, because if we don't, the whale will try to leap out from the tar and consume us. Luckily, we can get help from other porters, once again calling on the connections that we've made throughout the game to help us in our final moments. Once this thing is defeated, we begin episode 13, Sam Strand. Everyone is back at Capital Knot City now, even the director. Amelie has returned him here of his own free will. Her beach is above the rest. It's the one controlling everything. You can only travel there if you're allowed by her, and you can only leave through the same means. She wants Sam to talk to her, but Sam could get trapped if he goes. Sam's ultimate goal is just to talk her down, but if she can't be convinced, then he might have to shoot her.
Still, if it buys us time to try and build something better, a new lease on life, at least for a little bit. Well, I can think of one woman who made the most of a chance like that. Nothing lasts forever, not even the world. But we gotta keep it going as long as we can. Patch the holes, change the parts, all that. So we can say we had a good run, that we lived.
Before we move on to the finale, I'd like to briefly talk about Sam's character, because he has shown considerable growth over the course of the story. In the beginning of this video, I made the case that Sam had a pretty good reason to believe that connection wasn't worth it, and some things in the story have only furthered that. Once we find out about Sam's past, the wife that he had, the child that he was going to have, and how he lost them, it becomes even more reasonable to think that he would want to isolate, that he would want to turn away from the world and hide, that this world wasn't worth saving. Because he can't die, even when he sees his family break around him, he still manages to survive. He has to go on living with his shadow of grief hanging heavy over him. But Sam has managed to overcome this by the finale of the game, and it's partly due to all of the people that he's met along the way. The characters in Death Stranding have their own stories and their own problems, but they also serve as reflections of Sam's troubles with connection. Deadman fails to connect with the rest of the world because he himself feels as if he doesn't exist. He has no connection to the beach or the afterlife. He feels as if he is in some way in between these worlds, or at least outside of them. And in that way, he's kind of like a BB. But he manages to find a connection to Sam and to BB in general. Deadman is more like the BBs than he realizes. He criticizes Sam's affinity for Lou at first, but once his past is revealed, we realize that this same logic could be applied to Deadman. He's just a tool. He has no soul, no beach to go to. He's just meant for analysis and research, no feeling. But this isn't true, not of the BBs or Deadman. Mama has lost her connection to her other half, her best friend, her sister. She has spent time away, artificially prolonging her life at the sacrifice of her connection with Lochna. She pushes this connection away and has distanced herself from what her ultimate fate is, true connection with her remaining family. She overcomes this by finally leaving her soul in the lab and reuniting with Lochna at Mountain Knot. Sam has lost his connection with his family as well, at least his adopted family. He has shirked off his connection with them in favor of a life of solitude. Heartman has spent his life looking and searching for his family at the sacrifice of his own life. Sam has spent his life as a living dead instead of spending the time that he still has here. These people all serve as cautionary tales, or at least fables for Sam to see played out in front of him. They show Sam the error of his own ways and how important these connections truly are. This will only be furthered by the finale of the game, but let's get into that now. Sam decides to leave Lou behind with Fragile and head to Amelie's beach. Once there, Amelie tells us that she never existed. She was Bridget all along, or at least Bridget's soul. She's an extinction entity, a being created to bring about the end of the world. She is the sixth, and her goal was to end everything once and for all. When Sam connected the terminals to the chiral network, he was really connecting every beach back here, to Amelie's beach. Soon, a vast amount of antimatter will flood all of these beaches, and this reality will be gone in a flash. This is her goal, her destiny. This is what she was created for. But she gives Sam the final choice. He can either stay here with Amelie or he can kill her and hope to stop the spread. We're given this choice as we can aim at Amelie with a gun, but remember, this game is about the stick and the rope, and in the end, we have to choose the rope. Sam hugs Amelie instead of killing her, but he certainly can't stay here. There has to be a third option.
To live life one day at a time. Thank you, Sam. A gun won't help you here, but it still has a role to play. It was the bonds between people that brought the world together. And if that is what matters most to you, then I will stay here on this beach. And I will shut myself in and the rest of you out.
Shut yourself in, come on.
Once the last stranding starts, it can't be stopped. I can't go with you. All I can do is try to spare you the worst.
The only other way is for Amelie to stay on the beach and slow the extinction of the world. It will still come, it's inevitable, but it might be tens or hundreds of thousands of years. The only reason she started this whole thing was to hurry everything up, to rush the end, because she was sick of waiting. She didn't understand the point of it all, the futility in fighting against destiny. After this, Sam is transported back to his own beach, and we get the credits for the game as he runs absently across this world of the dead. Bridget, or Amelie, I'm just going to call her Amelie at this point, explains how she did everything to Sam. She was one person that was split across two worlds. Her body was in the world of the living as Bridget Strand, and her soul was in the world of the dead as Amelie. Amelie was a fake name, meaning soul lie. Amelie wouldn't age because she was the soul and Bridget was the body. She had to make up a fake story that Amelie was her daughter. She couldn't stop seeing the coming extinction in her dreams, and this led her to research the Death Stranding. She started to view this extinction as a means of survival for humanity, that they would push on through no matter what. She found Sam's beach as a child and revived him, making him a repatriate, and possibly giving him dooms. Sam is then running on the beach as we can hear his friends calling out to him. He eventually gets a way out and is whisked away from the beach back to the world of the living. Suddenly, we see Die Hard Man's inauguration as the new president of the UCA. He removes his mask to show the world who he truly is. It turns out that he's the same man we've been seeing in BB's memories. He's being honest, but there's still a sort of cover-up going on. He announces that Bridget and Amelie were killed and their memories will serve to further this country. He tries to give Sam his credit, but Sam wants none of it. He asked not to be named going forward. He tries to leave the ceremony, but Deadman stops him on the way out. It seems Sam has gotten over his phobia after all. It took them a month to find Sam on his beach. They had to search everywhere, but eventually used the pistol to get a connection to him.
Ironic, isn't it? The gun that set this whole mess in motion ends up being the key to saving you.
Amelie, she said it had another purpose.
Not a weapon, but a lifeline. A stick that became a rope.
Deadman tells Sam that Younger's wife was named Lisa Bridges, BB's mother, and that he was killed by a man named John, who would eventually go on to become the director of the UCA. We then see the director, now president. He owns up to everything from his past. All of his mistakes are laid bare in front of Sam. He was the one that killed Younger. Younger was his commanding officer in the military. They fought in many different places, but Younger always brought him back. He was a sorry soldier, but he gained his name because of Younger, because he wouldn't let him die. He did it all on Bridget's order. He did it for her because he loved her.
But I don't deserve it, goddammit! There is no atoning for what I've done.
Younger ended up forgiving him on the beach, and now he thinks that Younger brought him back for a reason. When Sam gets back to his quarters, Deadman tells him that Lou has ceased to function. He was never alive, but the pod has just stopped working. He needs to take it to the incinerator, one final delivery. Deadman tells Sam that hypothetically, he could take Lou out of the pod to see what happens, and that hypothetically, if Deadman took off his cuffs, he would be off the network and out of sight. But no, that would be illegal. Sam would not be able to do that. It would be totally illegal. Before Sam leaves, he talks to Fragile, who has now joined the UCA in an alliance with Fragile Express. Just like in the beginning of the game, she offers him a job, but of course he turns her down.
Come on. You put America back together, didn't you?
Doesn't mean there's a place for me. I've got no ties to anyone or anything. I might as well be dead. I felt like that when we first met in the cave. I still do.
Don't act like you're the same person. You've learned how to touch, to feel. You've connected with people. With us.
Everything I touch, I lose.
Then we make our final trek up the mountain outside of Capital Knot. Obviously, this trek replicates the first journey we made outside of the city to take BB to the incinerator. We are walking those same steps, repeating the same actions, but will this thing have the same ending? Once we get to the incinerator, we see more flashbacks and memories. John, Die Hard Man, had helped Younger get his child out of the facility, but he was eventually caught. We see this sequence play out as John gave him every chance to escape, but was eventually forced to corner him. Bridget ended up taking the final shot. We even have to repatriate as the baby. And if you haven't figured it out yet, we see the final scene where Sam talked to Younger, but some dialogue was hidden from us.
You told me your name was Sam Porter. But you're Sam Bridges. My son. My bridge to the future. Without you, I was just like any other Cliff. A dead end. No way forward. Nothing but an obstacle. Looking on at the world people like you were trying to build. Dividing people was the only thing I was ever good at.
Cliff Younger was actually Sam's father. These BB pod memories were his the entire time. Sam then finally takes Lou out of the pod to allow him to live, to give him a better life. But Lou doesn't wake up. There's this long, brutal scene where Sam is trying to save the child, begging him to wake up, and it's kind of a rough watch. But then we see Sam and Lou outside of the incinerator. Somehow Lou was brought back to life, assumingly by Amelie, and it's revealed at the end of the game that Lou is actually a girl. Sam names her Louise. The two assumingly escape and start their own life somewhere, outside of the Bridges network. This is the ending to the game, but it recontextualizes a lot of what we've seen so far, so we need to talk about it retroactively. So let's start with the reveal about Sam. Up until this point in the game, we thought that Sam's only trauma was what he experienced with losing his family. But apparently this happened to Sam even when he was a child. He lost his mother and father, but what exactly happened? Well, let's do a quick recap of events because a lot of the information across the game is delivered in a scattered way. Bridget Strand was an extinction entity. Her purpose was to bring about the last stranding and destroy life on Earth, but it seems that she wasn't always entirely aware of this. Before this, there was an event on the island of Manhattan. This is what started the Death Stranding proper. A doctor was performing a C-section on a pregnant woman who had been pronounced brain dead. This had somehow brought about a BT and caused a massive void out, destroying the island. With this, the world of the living and the world of the dead began to cross over. Sometime after this, the BB experiments began, and the president was eventually killed in a void out as well, leaving Bridget Strand as the president of the United States. These experiments into the BB technology would continue under her order. Clifford Younger had a child and a wife who was ill. He contacted his old partner John McClane, who brought him into the BB experiments. Once Younger became aware of what they were doing with his child, Sam, he would eventually attempt to escape the facility with the help of John. Bridget eventually put an end to this, though, and killed Younger and Sam before they could leave. Amelie regretted this, though, and brought Sam back to life, allowing him to become a repatriate. She would then begin researching the Death Stranding and developing the chiral network, which was built off of BBs itself. It's hinted that there is a BB installed in every one of the terminals across the country. Around 10 years ago, Sam was working for Bridges, but he was having terrible nightmares, a side effect of the dooms. He met a woman named Lucy who was providing him mental health counseling. She was a skeptic and didn't believe that beaches or dooms or any of these things existed. She thought it was a shared delusion, and she thought that Sam was playing into this delusion as a coping mechanism. Eventually, Sam decided to prove that he was a repatriate, taking his own life in front of her. She believed him from here on out, and the two actually formed a relationship together, leading to Lucy becoming pregnant. Lucy was eventually introduced to the family, meaning Bridget Strand herself, but Lucy started experiencing nightmares that she just couldn't shake. These nightmares were a result of Lou, her child in her stomach that was passed on dooms from Sam. Bridget ended up taking her to the beach to tell her the truth about everything, about her nature as an extinction entity, about Sam's importance in this whole thing, and about their child. This ended with Lucy taking her own life, and when Sam found her, this caused a void out, leaving him as the only survivor. Bridget would then start turning the terrorists her way, eventually lying about her own capture to get Sam to reconnect the country and bring the beaches closer to the world of the living so that she could attempt a mass extinction. Now, the first thing I'd like to focus on here is the changing perspective that we have on Bridges over the course of the story. This is something that I haven't really talked about yet, but our opinion of them changes wildly as we learn more information. When we first see the organization at the beginning of the story, we automatically view them as the good guys. We just assume that Sam is this curmudgeonly trope and that Bridges is really trying to do something good. They want to connect the UCA. They want to bring everything back together again to rebuild society. But things begin to change and shift as the story moves on. One of the first things that complicates the Bridges good guy mask is the fact that they were the ones that started the BB experiments in the first place. We have to ask ourselves if using unborn children as tools made to detect BTs is a good or bad thing to do. We don't exactly know the alternative. We can assume that Bridges would have some sort of way to keep these children living even though their mothers were brain dead. They're technologically advanced enough to do just about everything else, so why not this? In my opinion, I don't really think it's morally right. It might be some sort of a means to an end and might do more good for the world than evil, but it's still not right, and probably shouldn't have been researched in the first place. Even Bridges themselves effectively commented on the morality of using BBs. They too thought it was a bad thing that they wanted to leave in the past. They spread the rumor that the terrorists had started to bring back the tech, and the only reason that they used it was to fight fire with fire. That was the official story, but we learned that the terrorists weren't even using this tech in the first place. Now, this creates an interesting scenario. Once we learn that Bridges are the ones that brought back this tech, as the player, we sort of become uncomfortable with using the BBs. We realize that this is not a good thing that Bridges did, and we're using their unmoral tech. But why are we only uncomfortable with this when we find out that someone else didn't do it first? It should have been just as bad to fight fire with fire, but it's only bad when we realize that we are the progenitors of this technology and no one else decided to go that far. This is even furthered by the fact that the terminals in the UCA are all built on child sacrifice, essentially. We hear this a lot in different interviews and memos, and at first it seems like propaganda that the terrorists are spreading, but once we learn from Amelie that she planted BBs in every single one of the cities, we learn that it's the truth. Bridges are not exactly the good guys, and a lot of this can be explained by the corruption that was the Bridget Strand plan. Maybe she was just taking extreme measures to pull off her plan, but that can't explain everything. There were tons of people that went along with this plan, and sure, some of them were obscured, but Bridges are not the good guys in this world. And I would really argue that there are no good guys. There are definitely bad guys, and that's really where the terrorists come in, but even Higgs is painted as more sympathetic once we learn his story. In the early areas of the game, we'll get a few optional deliveries from a prepper named Peter Englert. Peter will want us to deliver pizzas to him, and these are among the first timed missions that we get. Delivering a pizza within a certain time limit, 30 minutes or less, while also keeping the pizza flat and not letting it get damaged is our goal. But after a few of these deliveries, we'll eventually be let into the prepper's shelter. Since we never actually see their hologram, we can head inside to meet the man, but he isn't there. It turns out this is Higgs' shelter. We find out through diary entries that Higgs was originally named Peter. He lived in this shelter alone with his uncle, who basically served as his father since he was a child. His parents had died when he was young, and his uncle took care of him, except he didn't really take care of him. He isolated Higgs, keeping him locked up and never allowing him to even think about the outside world. When Higgs would try to escape, he would be beaten and abused. Higgs finally took his revenge one day by stabbing his uncle and freeing himself of this familial oppression. He had to drag his uncle's body outside and eventually started to sense BTs nearby. This is where he got his dooms, and since that day he felt like killing had given him this gift. If he ever stopped killing, he would lose it. After a while, he began to take on jobs as a porter and eventually ran his own company on the west side of the country. He ended up allying with Fragile, needing her transportation powers and dooms to ensure that his porters weren't killed on the job. But one day he met Amelie, and she presented more power than Fragile ever could. He crossed his friend and did whatever Amelie asked of him, but the two never saw eye to eye on the plan. Amelie wanted to get Sam involved and connect the country before destroying the world. Higgs just wanted to kickstart things and get on with it, but this led to forming jealousy against Sam. This is why Higgs has such a hatred for our main character throughout the course of the game. He sees a lot of himself in Sam, a porter who's trying to connect the country, who has good intentions but doesn't understand the futility of it all. And he doesn't realize that he and Sam are more alike than even that. While Sam might have seemed bright-eyed and bushy-tailed from Higgs' perspective, he was really against the whole thing to begin with. In this way, Sam and Higgs are sort of a yin and yang for each other. They represent a similar starting point, but the divergence of paths. It really feels something like Snake and Liquid from MGS1. And at the end of the day, maybe both sides of this conflict have no point in being good or bad. They were both influenced by Amelie. They were both made to believe that their cause was the just one. Maybe they haven't been able to be moral at all until Amelie has been gone from their influence. Maybe with the end of the game and Amelie staying on the beach, Bridges can make their own history. They have a newfound hope for tomorrow, because what decisions they make now, where they choose to go, and what they choose to do is their choice alone. And moving forward, they will bear this responsibility. The stick or the rope. The game also has this undercurrent that connection may not be the perfect way forward. There are tons of little hints and signs that connecting the world is actually the wrong thing to do here. The idea that the chiralium density could cause another Death Stranding. The idea that the system is built on unborn children. The idea that the tar is holding something possibly more sinister. And I think a lot of these ideas are hints for a sequel to the game. This is made even clearer with the announcement trailer asking the question, should we have connected? But these details work in this story as well, because by the end, you aren't really sure. Even in the new missions provided by the director's cut version of the game, we see a group of separatists that stormed a BB production facility. Even just imagining that there would be a production facility for these sort of pods makes things feel a little less black and white. This facility was taken over by a woman named Coffin, who actually ties into Higgs and Fragile's stories. She turns out to be Fragile's mother. She enlisted Higgs in her group before he started working with Amelie. They were working together to try and take down Bridges since they were using these facilities to make BB pods. She wanted to build a better world for her daughter and sadly never got to do that. This mission also feels kind of like an ode to Metal Gear in at least some small way. We're infiltrating a facility, and Sam even interacts with a cardboard box at some point. The other great thing that Death Stranding does around its story is the warping of symbols. We see this pretty early on, how rain and even rainbows are completely changed in this world. An upside-down rainbow is a sign that timefall is coming or that BTs are near. And we see Igor and Sam fear this symbol at the beginning of the game. It's in stark contrast to how we view rainbows in our world, generally seen as symbols of light or joy or even a bridge. It's interesting to think that at some point in this world's history, there was a last time when someone thought of the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz as a wistful ballad. The last time that someone hung one of those cheap pot of gold stickers on their window for St. Patrick's Day. The last time that someone played Rainbow Road in Mario Kart. But symbols are warped all over the game. Children as tools, bridges as weapons, rain as a symbol of death or age, and possibly the only straightforward symbol in the game are masks. Higgs wears the golden mask as an Egyptian symbol that pharaohs would wear when they died. Die Hard Man wears a mask, not to give himself some unearned status, but to hide his identity. He doesn't want people remembering the name John McClane and knowing what he did in his past. But it's also his way of running away from it. He's hiding his identity from himself. He's ashamed for what happened with Younger. Even if he didn't pull the trigger, it was still his doing. Amelie wears the mask of Bridget Strand. She hides her true self behind a persona that was created for the people. And the largest mask of all, one that is not even physical, is Sam's mask. This is what we talked about at the beginning of the game. Sam wears the mask of the uncaring, unfeeling individual. If he shows people who he truly is, then he could get hurt again. And he does get hurt again through the course of the story, but that is the pain of connection. These themes and ideas feel ripped straight from the 1966 film The Face of Another, directed by Hiroshi Teshigahara. It is an adaptation of a Kobo Abe novel, which, if you remember the beginning of my Metal Gear Solid videos, Kojima is a known fan of. It's a film that centers around a man who has had his face disfigured. Bandages cover his face, and he obtains a prosthetic mask that allows him to restart his life. This new face affords him the ability to change his personality, to wear a mask. The film deals with the idea of connections, isolation, and personality. It feels like Kojima had to have been inspired in some small part by this story, as it feels incredibly poignant here. Death Stranding's story examines this idea throughout its runtime, the pain of having other people in your life. If you push everyone off, you might not have to deal with this pain, but you'll feel that void. The people in this world might supplement that with artificial oxytocin. They might supplement it with cargo. They might climb into their work, but the void will always be there. And I personally know how hard this can be. I've suffered self-induced isolation many times in my life. I always tried to convince myself that I was doing it for other people, or that I was doing it for myself. I'm better off alone. I like being alone. One excuse after the other. But the harsh truth is that we need other people. Humans were meant to be near each other, to share with each other, to help each other, to tell stories. If this life isn't meant for sharing, then what's the point of all of this? This seems to be Death Stranding's main theme, and while it does touch upon other perspectives of this idea, it really wants to get home the point of connection. It all returns to the stick or the rope, one choice that we all must make. Death Stranding is truly a masterpiece of modern gaming. One of the best things that it does is separate itself from every other game by just being so damn unique. We live in a world of remakes, remasters, and sequels, where games and media are not viewed based on their merit, style, or ingenuity, but their ability to be drained of every dollar and penny. And of course, I think games should make money, and this path that we've gone down was inevitable. If the people are buying it, the companies will keep making it. But to see something like Death Stranding get made in the modern day and do well is just refreshing. On paper, this game shouldn't work. It's a game about delivering packages and building structures filled with a plot that you will surely be unable to follow on first playthrough. It takes about 40 hours to complete, and most of those 40 hours will be spent climbing over rocks and trudging through snow. But Death Stranding is not for everyone. Like I said at the beginning of this review, not every gamer will take to this game. I have friends that I would never recommend this game to because I know they wouldn't like it. And that's fine, not everyone has to like it. But for those people that do enjoy the weird and adventurous, the bold and unique, Death Stranding will be exactly their cup of tea. It has a world quite unlike any other, a world that is so bleak and dark, but somehow manages to still bleed hope into its viewer at the end of the day. Its characters are broken and spent, some jaded and too cynical to love any longer, some doing whatever they can to survive. But we watch these characters trip, stumble, and fall over and over until they can get it right. At the end of the day, they have each other, and that's what brings Sam back from the beach again. The ending of this story has that Kojima signature all over it. Even though we spent hours delivering packages through muck and mules and BTs chasing us, he still manages to find the silver lining. But how the story sticks its landing isn't really what this game is about. The game is about being lost in its journey. In some contrast to Kojima games of the past, you may forget a cutscene or two, or a moment that you spent with a character, or a plot beat here or there, but what you won't forget are the moments of beauty that you spend across Death Stranding's landscape. The game manages to give the player freedom and not restrict their movement across its space, but somehow in that freedom, moments of beauty still manage to bloom. And that is what I love about this game. But the biggest strength that this game has is just the permanence of it. A lot of games market themselves as allowing the player to make choices, and these games might just give you a different ending based on the way you play or the decisions that you make in its story. But Death Stranding allows you to do something far stronger than that. It allows you to make a mark on its world. I replayed Death Stranding quite a bit for this review. I played it a few times on release and just couldn't put it down. During any of the times that I played this game, I placed structures, I built bridges, I built zip lines, I delivered lost packages, I left things in the share locker for others to use. Those structures have popped up in other people's worlds. People have used my roads, my bridges, my zip lines, and hopefully, in some small way, that has provided them some relief in their journey. In that way, I have had an effect on these players' games, their experiences. I have made my mark. And maybe none of these players actively looked at the name on the structure. I know I haven't memorized every username that I've interacted with while playing Death Stranding, but that's not the point. Building these structures isn't about getting recognition or entering into some sort of leaderboard. It's just about helping others. This is the most important thing that Death Stranding does. It allows you to make your mark. It allows you to have an effect on other players who play the game. You get to interact with its spiderweb of interactions across different game worlds. In that way, your actions in this world have permanence. They matter more than getting a different ending or siding with a specific character. I have made my mark on the world of Death Stranding, and I hope you have too. And maybe we've interacted here or there, maybe I've used one of your roads, and maybe you've picked up one of my weapons that I dropped. In that way, even outside of this video, we're connected. Death Stranding released to mostly glowing reviews, but was quite mixed across its reception. Some outlets gave the game perfect scores, noting the beauty of the world and the new path that it was forging in a completely untrodden genre. Others were less favorable and took issue with its confusing story and repetitive gameplay. The game did well with players though, as a lot of people wanted to see what Kojima had in store after returning to game development. It had sold over 5 million copies as of July 2021 and had 16 million players by the end of 2023. The game did well enough to greenlight a sequel, Death Stranding 2, which will be released in 2025. I have high hopes for the second game in the franchise, and by the looks of it, it's going to be just as weird and interesting as the first game was. Regardless of how it does, I'll be there. Until then, bye now.